November 16th, 2022. We'll have roll call first.
Commissioner Taylor,
Present.
Commissioner Targ, Commissioner Haskell, here. Vice Chair Goulden,
Here.
Chair Kopsell.
I think I'd like to start by saying two of our commissioners ran for town council, and the numbers aren't in, but it looks like they have been elected. So congratulations to you two. And we'll miss you. Luckily, we're meeting a lot, so we'll get
Yeah, I was
a
gonna
lot
say.
of benefit.
Seems a little unfair.
Really suck
but
out
yeah.
all the planning commission work you can do. But then we'll miss you after that. So for the public, they're going to be on the planning commission until December 13th. And then I think December 14th, promoted to town council.
We'll get a year's worth of our duties done by December.
Yes.
We get the rest of the year off.
I
right?
think so. It's like I hear an echo still. Let me see if Great, so we'll start with public comments, and this is the time that the public can comment on things that are not on the agenda, which the main item is the environmental report for the housing and safety elements. We also have approval of minutes from our previous meeting, so save any comments on those two topics for later, but if there's anything else, we'll take those comments now. Go ahead, come up to the mic if you don't mind.
Evening, thank you. I'm Rusty Day, and I also want to congratulate our new town council members. As you tackle the many challenges facing us, I ask you to reflect for a moment tonight about the integrity of our governance. When we elect leaders to govern us, how will they exercise the power we entrust to them, especially when no one is watching closely? Will they have the integrity to apply our rules, our procedures honestly and even-handedly, or will they ignore or bend them to suit their interests? When mistakes are pointed out, will they acknowledge and correct them, or will they deflect, deny, or even lie about them? Will they respond candidly and civilly to those who publicly disagree with their judgments, or will they disparage and smear them? Our governance is predicated and built on trust. Trust in the belief that our elected representatives will exercise the power that is entrusted to them with integrity. My letter in your agenda packet provides two glaring examples that I believe call into serious question the integrity of our governance. In one instance, shortly after Stanford agreed to develop housing at the Wedge, the town's geologic hazard maps were mysteriously altered to remove the well-documented geologic fault that runs directly beneath the proposed housing project. Despite regulations that require a public hearing and documented approval of this body, for all such changes, there was no planning commission hearing or approval to remove that fault from our geologic hazard maps. No geotechnical investigation was provided to justify that change. Instead, the maps were simply changed to remove the fault. Who decided to do that without this body's required public hearing and written approval? And why hasn't that change been corrected and the fault restored to our maps? In the second instance, the wildfire hazard assessment and fire prevention policies adopted in our general plan safety element 12 years ago have been ignored and replaced with a discredited 2008 CAL FIRE map that shows far less wildfire hazard than the general plan states and documents. As I point out in my letter, no fire professional believes the 2008 CAL FIRE map accurately depicts the severity and extent of wildfire hazards in Portola Valley. And yet, it was inserted in the draft housing element provided to HCD as the basis to assess our town's wildfire risk. Who made that decision and why? Who in this town has the authority to ignore and override the express findings and policies of the general plan?
Thank you, Leslie. Time's up.
Both of these examples fall directly within your purview. They
Thank you,
demonstrate, I believe, the trust and the integrity of our governance is not always justified. I hope that this body and the new members of our town council will act to justify that trust by demonstrating that this kind of behavior is not acceptable and will not reoccur. Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll hear from Rita on Zoom.
I want to congratulate the two sitting members of the Planning Commission on what it looks like is going to be them moving over to the council, and looking forward to the third spot being cleared up, and hopefully the almanac will start reflecting the numbers properly instead of what they're currently reporting, which is unfortunate until somebody else starts reporting for us. But I also want to thank you for cleaning up the minutes and having the minutes reflect a little closer to what was said and done in the meeting for people that were not attending the meeting. And I know it's a far reach, but perhaps if we get an intern or three in the office, if they can then go back and perhaps clarify and document some of the other previous minutes, even if it's not to be reapproved, but as a addendum to those minutes, so that we can have archives on what has happened during this historic time in this town, because we have a lot of things, moving parts going on right now. And for somebody that's not attending these meetings, not keeping up with what's going on, they don't have a clue what's hitting them, how much it's going to cost, how we're going to pay for it. And that's not who we are. You know, we're a community, as what the previous speaker said, that was built on trust and working together. So let's see what we can do to clean up our own immediate archives so that we can send a clear picture on what's actually happening with all of these different important pieces that are going to be changing the face, the roads, our safety, and so many other things in our lovely town. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Go ahead, Ellen.
I just got a couple of questions. One I asked before, and
Oh, no, if you want to say your name.
I'm sorry, Ellen Vernazza. I had two questions. One is, I had asked this before, and I wrote Laura a letter asking for a response to it of what the rules are on ADUs on condo or townhouse projects. And at the last meeting I asked, you guys had no answer. You didn't know. And 3 weeks ago I sent Laura a letter and I still haven't gotten any response. So I would like to know, how do we find this information out before we make any plans for the future? Shouldn't we know these answers before anything is proposed to town for thoughts of development? Anyway, so how can I get the answer? That's my one question. Second off, so you're proposing, there is a proposal of rezoning the Nath Horse Triangle to be high density. And I sent you all a letter just to verify that. Has anyone considered that half of that property is open space? And was that even discussed when 4388 the plans were allowed there? Because there is building on the other side of, that were in the proposal on the other side of the creek also at 4388. And that seemed to have been okayed. And I was just wondering how that got okayed when in the general plan, it specifically says it's open space. I just want to get answers as far as 4370, how much of that land is open space from the, hold on, the east side of the creek, if you want to say that, the southeast side of the creek, all the way over to the property lines of the next properties. That's all open space by the general plan designation. So I would like input on that if I could. Thank you.
Anybody else here in the open comment section? Great, and I see no more hands on Zoom, so we'll go to our first agenda item.
I see one more hand up.
Oh,
through the
yep,
chair.
there, it popped up since I said that. Hi, Christy, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I noticed in the document, October 2022, white page 8, that the Stanford Wedge now has listed 52 versus 39. And I'm wondering if there was a change in a proposal that we are not aware of. I hid it as an attachment to this agenda, and then I was surprised to see that. So if you could answer that question. And then I have some other comments. I think the residents deserve to have better titles for each of the building sites, such as 4394 Alpine Road Housing Site. That's what it's called. So if I was to wonder where that is, I have to go drive to it. Now we know it as the old tennis court in the grassy field. We'd appreciate better and more thorough terminology for your sites. And that goes for Dorothy Ford Park Open Space. You call it vacant portion of Dorothy Ford Field, an open space housing site. I see it, and most of us see it, as Ford Fields is the Little League field where 600 kids play Little League from San Mateo County. So I see it as Ford Field is the Little League field, and Dorothy Ford Park is the park next to the field. Have we combined both of those as the gateway to be one parcel versus two, or does it still remain two parcels? And can you do a better job at separating the two titles? And I brought this up last night in open space as well. And it was discussed, and we need more clarity on when you're talking about those two areas. Glen Oaks, you say Glen Oaks. We call it Glen Oaks and Isola Horse Training. We need to know that Isola is right behind Glen Oaks, and it is still a large training horse facility. So please relabel some of these so the residents know without driving to the addresses. So you say the office on 3470. Well, there's many offices along Alpine Road. I call it the medical buildings to the right of Roberts. So we just need to do a better job at, you can't just call it an office building at 3470. Please be more descriptive in the future when you're listing these. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. Okay, I think we're done with comments now. Our first agenda item.
Great, thank you. Through the chair, I heard that it's a little bit hard to hear you on Zoom. So if you
Oh.
could move your mic a little bit closer.
Well, isn't that nice?
Thank
Somebody
you.
told you that. Thanks. There.
Okay, hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Laura Russell, Planning and Building Director. So if we could launch the PowerPoint, we're going to have a joint presentation this evening. I'm going to give part of it. Carla Violet from Urban Planning Partners is going to give part of it. And then we have two of our technical sub-consultants to provide a little bit of information. And if there are questions from the Planning Commission for those technical parties, we can take those as well and try to answer them. So the topic tonight is the initial study and the mitigated negative declaration for the housing and the safety element update process. So this is a fairly long presentation, but we thought it was warranted given the complexity of the subject matter and make sure that we're all on the same starting point regards CEQA and this analysis in particular. Next slide. So the meeting format tonight is a little bit different than what we typically do. The purpose of this is really to receive public comments. So there's going to be a staff and consultant presentation, and then there's going to be Planning Commission questions, and then public comments. So there's not a deliberation this evening like the Planning Commission would normally do. Next slide. So again, a little bit more detail on the meeting structure. We're here to receive those comments on the draft environmental document. And we want to note, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, that the comments that we receive that are specific to the evaluations, the conclusions, and or the mitigation measures are going to be addressed in a response to comments memo that's going to be forthcoming for the Planning Commission's December 13th meeting. So to make it perfectly clear, no actions or decisions will be made by the Planning Commission tonight, and the Planning Commission will not discuss the project details or the merits of the project. So in this case, the merits of the safety element or the housing element. Next slide, and the associated parts of that. So we wanted to take a step back and talk about what CEQA is and what it isn't, and help people with some of the terminology. If this is new, it's really complicated. So CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and the purpose of it is to inform. This is really an important core of what CEQA is supposed to be. So we want to inform the government decision makers and the public about the potential environmental effects of proposed activities and to prevent significant avoidable environmental damage. So we want to think about this in its context. CEQA was adopted in 1970 in the state of California, signed by Governor Ronald Reagan. It had to do with the entire environmental movement that was happening at that time, and a recognition that governmental decisions were being made without consideration of environmental impacts. So this is all about information. It doesn't dictate an outcome. So this is not a recommendation about whether a project should be approved or not. It's background analysis. And it's required for any kind of project that's seeking a discretionary approval or a legislative approval, like in this case for new policies, from a public agency that could either cause a direct physical change or a reasonably foreseeable indirect change in the environment. It's also supposed to identify ways to avoid or mitigate impacts if feasible. Next slide. CEQA implementation is complicated. We think about this all the time. We talk about how do these pieces come together. So what guides CEQA analysis is a series of things. We start with the state law itself, and that's been amended from time to time since 1970. And then there are CEQA guidelines, and those are similar to having the force of law, but not quite, but they're taken very seriously. And those are published by the State Office of Planning and Research. You've heard of that before, that's OPR. And then CEQA is enforced through cases, through lawsuits. So the court decisions and the case law are also very important to how CEQA is implemented. So a lot of times we're referencing case law when we talk about CEQA. Then there are regulations and guidelines that are published by other state agencies and regional agencies. And then there are best practices. So all of these things come together for how we implement CEQA. Next slide. So there's some key concepts that I wanted to go over with you. First, what is a project in CEQA? A project is a very wide list of things in CEQA. It's kind of any activity that requires a discretionary or legislative action. Okay, so it's not things that are done ministerial just through a checklist in day-to-day business, but anytime you're interpreting a policy or creating a new policy or approving a project, a physical development project that includes something that's going to be built and has a discretionary aspect to it. So that's one way to think about the word project. When us planners say project, we're talking about that wide thing. Then it's important to think about under CEQA, what's a program level analysis versus a project level analysis. This is tricky because see that word project again, but it means a different thing because that's how CEQA is, okay? So a program level analysis includes broad policies. It does not examine all potential site specific impacts of the individual projects because they are not known yet. So this is when we're talking about new policies generally. So this is what's normally done for general plan adoptions and general plan amendments. And so this initial study and mitigated negative declaration is that kind of CEQA analysis. It's a program level. We can contrast that to what's called a project level analysis. And that's when there's a specific proposal for development that comes in. And we know where it's going to be and what the site plan is and many more details about it. So that would include planning, construction, and operation of projects. So an example of that is the Stanford Wedge EIR that I think all of you in the audience have recently read or at least spent a lot of time with. So that's an important distinction to understand. Those documents are supposed to be different. Then what about future projects that are proposed in the housing element? Does this mean that there wouldn't be any additional environmental review? And the answer to that is no. When each individual project comes forward under the housing element, it would be evaluated individually, and then the appropriate CEQA review would be determined based on what is proposed. So there may be projects that are exempt, such as ADUs. There may be projects that require significant environmental review. So an example of that would be the Ford Field and Open Space Affordable Housing Development would require its own project level CEQA analysis. So anytime a project would come in under this plan, we start with what did we learn from this ISMND? And then we maybe can screen some things out and say, oh, we have a pretty good reason to believe there's not going to be this kind of impact, but this kind of area, we didn't do detailed analysis, we need it. So we can imagine that happening on future projects. Next slide. So next, what's a mitigated negative declaration versus an environmental impact report? So the lead agency, that's the town, prepares an initial study, that's the IS part, to determine if the project may have a significant adverse effect. This is normally done with a checklist that's provided as part of the CEQA guidelines. And then if there's either no adverse effects, or if that potential effect could be reduced to less than significant level, then a mitigated negative declaration can be adopted. So if you can find and adopt mitigation measures that could reduce the potential impacts to less than significant, then an MND is acceptable. If not, then an EIR has to be prepared. So this is the way that I think about it in kind of common language. So I know, I recognize these terms don't make a lot of sense compared to our everyday common usage of these words. We get it, it's a major challenge of implementing CEQA. So these are kind of, you think of it as terms of art, or think of it as terms that have been defined over the years through CEQA practice and through case law. Next slide. So then we think about then what does significant mean? So we can't just think what is significant in common language, we have to think what is significant in CEQA language. So a significant effect is defined as a substantial or potentially substantial adverse change in the environment. It should be based on scientific and factual data, and it is measured against the existing physical environmental conditions, which we refer to as the baseline. So this kind of outlines this graphic, how we think about it. We decide on the source of the criteria for each topic, and we define the thresholds for each topic. The thresholds can come from a variety of places. The most common places for the thresholds of significance, as they're called, can come from the CEQA guidelines. They can come from regulatory agencies that may be state or regional. A good example of that is air quality. They could come from local policies. You can have locally adopted thresholds, or you could have rules in your general plan. So you could have other local policies that could be considered thresholds of significance. And then in some cases, you're going to use the thresholds of other agencies, depending on the scope of the environmental work that you're working on. Next slide. So now we're talking about what's included in this analysis. So again, we're using the word project because that's what CEQA tells us it is. It's a project. But we can also think here, what are the program components? That would be another way to think about it. Overall, what are we analyzing in this document? So the first is the housing element update itself. So this is the one that we've all been working on and talking so much about. And then the safety element update. And so that's also in draft form and being reviewed by committees right now. And then you're familiar with the basic concept of the safety element, but it's to mitigate negative impacts of natural and human-made hazards. And then there are general plan amendments that are necessary to create conformity with the housing element update. So as a reminder to everyone, the housing element is part of the general plan. So this last over a year since last August, we have been convening the public meetings to talk about the amendments to the general plan. And so it's not as if these haven't been discussed in great detail in front of the public. But the way to think about this is there are small places or there are areas of other elements of the general plan that have to be updated now to be consistent with the housing element. And so these in particular will come before the Planning Commission in more detail at your next meeting when we focus on that. But we have to create the new gateway land use classification to allow affordable housing, recreation, and open space uses at the Ford Field and the site across the street at Ladera Church. We have to create new multifamily land use classifications, create the mixed use land use classification, create an overlay classification for the opt-in for voluntary rezoning that we've been talking about. And then there has to be a revision to the general plan land use map with the land uses. And then there also has to be, and this is in response to a question that we got during oral communications, there does have to be a revision to the Nathorst Triangle Plan map. So there does have to be a revision to that because it does call for open space. And the housing element suggests that other development could occur there. So that answers a question from earlier tonight. Next slide. Also part of the ISMND are the zoning code amendments that the Planning Commission has been talking about. So 3 new zoning districts, again, including multifamily, mixed use, codifying the affiliated housing program, and revising the zoning map itself with those new districts. Next slide. So this is kind of an overall of the environmental review process. We have prepared the ISMND, which identifies environmental impacts and mitigation measures. We are currently in the 30-day review period. That ends on November 29th at 5 p.m. And then there's going to be a response to comments memo. So what our technical team will do is look at all of those comments that we've received. We're going to analyze and pull out the environmental issues that are relevant under CEQA. When folks make comments on environmental documents, a lot of times there's going to be comments that come in that are more on the merits of the project or are not topic areas under CEQA. So those items will not be addressed in this place in the response to comments memo, but there will be a memo coming out that'll be available, posted to the website. And then the Planning Commission will meet on December 13th and make a formal recommendation to the Town Council. And then the Town Council will take up the housing element and the environmental document in January of next year. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carla Violet from Urban Planning Partners, and then we're going to have some of our sub-consultants share some information from them as well. So here you go, Carla.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. As Laura mentioned, Urban Planning Partners was contracted by the town to help prepare the initial study, MND. We also have a large group of experts that helped us prepare this document. Fair and Peers, who is here tonight, prepared the transportation VMT analysis, as well as the evacuation analysis. Baseline, also represented here this evening, prepared a number of the technical sections for air quality, GHG, geology, hazards, hydrology, and noise. Environmental Collaborative prepared our biological resources analysis. Cogstone worked on the cultural and tribal cultural resources sections. And Zeke with Deer Creek Resources prepared the wildfire hazards memo, which informed our wildfire analysis. So I'm actually going to hand over the presentation to Fair and Peers briefly, just to give us a high-level overview of the VMT and evacuation analysis. So let me see if Charlie could come up to the stage, the stand here.
The virtual stage.
Yes.
Thank you, Carla. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Charlie Coles. I'm with Fair and Peers. And again, we're the transportation consultants working with Urban Planning Partners and the town on the housing and safety element updates. I just have 2 quick slides that I'll be presenting tonight. First is, what is VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, and why are we required to use it when determining transportation impacts? That's because of Senate Bill 743. So SB 743, as it's called, fundamentally changed how transportation impacts are analyzed under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. because of SB 743, the latest CEQA statute and guidelines specify that vehicle miles traveled is now the appropriate metric to evaluate transportation impacts, and delay and congestion, which were previously used, for example, intersection level of service, are no longer applicable under CEQA. So what is VMT, or vehicle miles traveled? It is defined as the distance that a car travels in a day, regardless of how many passengers are in that car. So one car traveling 1 mile equals 1 VMT, simply put. So in short, Senate Bill 743 changed the focus of transportation impact analysis in CEQA from measuring impacts to drivers to measuring the impact of driving on the environment. Next slide, please. So to comply with these new rules and to present a complete VMT analysis, the initial study prepared for the Portola Valley Housing and Safety Element Updates used 2 types of VMT metrics. The first is project-generated VMT, which is used to assess the direct impacts of the project, and boundary VMT, which assesses the project's effect on VMT. So as you're reviewing the initial study, you'll see that the VMT analysis section has been organized into these 2 types of VMT metrics, project-generated VMT and project's effect on VMT, or it's also called boundary VMT. So the figure shown on your screen illustrates both project-generated VMT and boundary VMT. So first, project-generated VMT is similar to vehicle trip generation. So to estimate the project-generated VMT, the daily trips generated by a project are multiplied by the distance traveled, which may go beyond jurisdictional limits, as you see in the figure on your screen. Whereas the project's effect on VMT instead evaluates the change in total on-road travel within a specific geographic area boundary before and after a project is built. So the initial study and an often cited example of how a project can affect VMT is the addition of a grocery store in an area where there currently isn't a grocery store. So residents of a neighborhood without a grocery store need to travel a great distance to an existing grocery store. However, by adding a grocery store or a new project to that neighborhood, you ultimately shorten many of those grocery store shopping trips and overall reduce VMT to and from that neighborhood. So that's just a way to kind of understand those metrics, and hopefully that's helpful. So correct me if I'm wrong, but now I believe I'm handing it over to Bob to talk about the evacuation analysis.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie, and good evening. Bob Grandy with Fair and Peers. I'll be presenting 2 slides on the evacuation time estimates that were prepared as part of the ISMND. The first slide is really kind of a summary of what we did in the analysis. We created a baseline that used the methodology and the model developed for the wildfire traffic evacuation capacity study that was presented to the council and approved back in August. This was our baseline, which was a stress test condition with full evacuation. They assumed 100% occupancy of the households and evacuation, 100% evacuation of those residents, employees, and equestrian trailers throughout the town and in adjacent unincorporated areas. So the ETE is really the elapsed time for all of those vehicles to evacuate and either get onto I-280 or go beyond I'd say to the east of I-280. So that's what the ETE represents. It's the total elapsed time from the evacuation notice until the last car leaves that portion of the network. And we provide ETE ranges for multiple evacuation scenarios. In the study, we looked at a scenario with all routes open and a second scenario with only the north routes heading to the north up Sand Hill and through Woodside. And then a third scenario with only routes to the south open, which would be Alpine and Arastadero. So all that information is presented. And we looked at the effect of the added residential units that were identified in the housing element update on those evacuation times, those total evacuation times. Next slide, please. So this is a summary, the overview of the results of the analysis, and our ETE results are reported by 15-minute intervals. So for example, 3 hours or 3 hours and 15 minutes or 3 hours and a half. And because we have ranges, we the ranges are embedded within those 15-minute intervals. We also present reports for a range with 2 different road capacity conditions, one with normal road capacity conditions and one with conditions that are reduced as a result of smoke and embers and other kind of things that would affect capacity during an evacuation, and 2 different evacuation levels. And by that, I mean 100% evacuation and 90% evacuation time. So we have all that information provided. The new housing units are forecast to generate about 400 added evacuation trips at build out of all of those units. And the total evacuation times, which range from kind of a low of about 3 hours and 15 minutes to a high of 5 hours for the 100% evacuation reduced capacity scenario, those times would increase by about 1 15-minute interval for the various study scenarios. And with that, I'll turn it back to Carla.
Thanks so much, Bob. Okay, so let's bring us back to the full ISM&D. So it is in the form of a checklist, and it analyzes each of the environmental topics shown here. And I'm going to review 6 out of the 20 topics. There's a lot to cover here, but we anticipate those top 6 are of greatest community interest. So I will go over those in the next 6 slides. The first environmental topic is aesthetics. The CEQA checklist, which I'm going to abbreviate for each of these topics, asks if the project would have a substantial adverse effect on any scenic vistas, scenic highways, visual character, if it would create a new source of substantial light or glare. And the analysis determined less than significant findings. This is because the proposed zoning amendments preserve the scenic corridors and their development standards. Also, any new development would need to be consistent with the zoning district, and that includes the new multifamily and mixed-use districts that are being proposed, as well as general plan development standards. And lastly, any site-specific development plans would be reviewed by the ASCC and Planning Commission. So what did we learn for air quality? This analysis looked at whether the project would conflict with applicable air quality plans, result in a net increase in criteria pollutant, expose sensitive receptors to substantial pollutant concentrations, and result in other emissions such as odor. And the analysis concluded that less than significant finding with mitigation incorporated. And the 2 mitigation measures that are included in the initial study, the first is that all new development must implement a dust control program during construction. And this is recommended best practice by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, also known as BACMD. The second mitigation measure requires any new mixed-use development quantify the operational criteria air pollutant emissions and identify measures to reduce average daily emissions below those BACMD thresholds. Okay, for biological resources, the analysis looked at whether the project would have a substantial adverse effect on special status species, riparian habitat, wetlands, fish or wildlife, and if it would conflict with any local policies or an adopted habitat conservation plan. And the conclusion was that all impacts would be less than significant. This is because all development projects would be subject to general plan policies and municipal code. And there are code language in there related to avoiding sensitive resources and providing detailed studies where potential impacts could occur. There are also state and federal regulations to protect sensitive biological resources. The town's code also has requirements for tree removal and creek setbacks. For geology and soils, There are a number of CEQA questions included here. Would the project have substantial adverse effects involving earthquake faults, strong seismic ground shaking or ground failure, landslides? Would the project result in soil erosion, be located on unstable soil or expansive soil, have soils incapable of supporting septic tanks, and would the project destroy a paleontological resource? And the conclusion for this topic was that impacts would be less than significant and less than significant with mitigation incorporated. So all development projects would be subject to several state regulations outlined here, including the California Building Code, Seismic Hazards Mapping Act, the State Water Resources Board's Construction General Permit, the Water Quality Control Board's Regional Stormwater Permit, as well as the town's municipal code and safety element policies. And there is one mitigation measure in there to address if paleontological resources were to be discovered during construction. There are set protocols for that. For transportation, the CEQA checklist includes questions about would the project conflict with a program plan, ordinance, or policy, conflict with CEQA guidelines addressing transportation impacts, substantially increase hazards, and result in inadequate emergency access. Again, the conclusion here was less than significant. We've heard a little bit already from Bob and Charlie about this, but all development projects would be subject to town general plan standards related to transit, roadway, bicycle, or pedestrian facilities. The analysis also showed that project VMT impacts were less than the total VMT, home-based VMT, and boundary VMT thresholds. And finally, as Bob mentioned, for the ETE analysis, the conclusion was that the proposed housing units would result in an incremental increase in evacuation times, a maximum of 15 minutes. Okay, the last topic we'll be covering tonight is wildfire. The CEQA checklist questions include: would the project substantially impair emergency response evaluation plan, exacerbate wildfire risks, require infrastructure that would exacerbate fire risk, and finally, expose people or structures to significant risk? The analysis concluded less than significant impacts. And this was because the proposed housing sites are in areas with the least wildfire risk, which was informed by Deer Creek Resources Wildfire Hazards Memo. Also, development projects would be subject to updated safety element policies. A couple of those include that developments must comply with the town's evacuation assessment and provide a minimum of 2 points of access if they're within high or very high fire hazard severity zones. They would also need to comply with the town's municipal code. There's home hardening ordinance, which is one of the strictest in the state. And they would also be subject to Chapter 7A building codes, which is applicable to any development in the WUI. And there are also other relevant state fire and building codes that these developments would be subject to. The next steps for the MND, as Laura alluded to earlier, is to receive public comments tonight. In addition, comments can be submitted to the town through November 29th at 5 p.m. via email, housing@portolavalley.net. They can also be mailed to the town or dropped off. And then a memo with responses to comments will be attached to that Planning Commission packet scheduled for December 13th, and it will also be made available online. Now for the housing element, just to remind everyone, there are 3 upcoming Planning Commission meetings. November 30th, we'll be reviewing all aspects of the housing elements up until that point. December 7th, there will be another study session to review. And then finally, December 13th, the Planning Commission will review and provide a formal recommendation to the Town Council, who will then review all the materials for adoption in January 2023. And with that, we will conclude our presentation and open it up for questions from the Planning Commission.
Great, thanks, Carla. We'll start. Craig, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I just had two questions on the process. I didn't fully understand the program CEQA versus the project CEQA in terms of impact. I mean, I understood how you were trying to sort of lay it out and the project, big P project versus little p project. But can a program CEQA analysis affect a project CEQA analysis, and how does it affect it? And I heard you start to allude to it a little bit. It sounded like, well, if you decided some things in the program, then you wouldn't have to redecide them in the project, but I didn't really understand that level of detail. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, let me start and then we can turn it over to Kara and maybe other members of our team to add on to that as well. The way that I think about it is that sometimes the program MND can be a screening document. So if there's a issue on a particular project and you don't know whether it may be meaningful or significant, you start with the program MND and you look at that analysis and see if that analysis was sufficient or if it's covered the topic at hand. And then if it has, then you may know you don't need to look at that particular topic area for that project moving forward. But if you think, oh, that's not covered by the program document, we have to do a site-specific analysis, or it requires knowledge of the site plan and the project details in order to analyze it, then you would just do it as part of the project CEQA analysis. So let me see if Kara, do you want to add on to that as well?
Yes,
Go ahead, Kara. I'll jump in later.
sure. I think that's exactly it. Sometimes we refer to the distinction as with program level, you don't know the, as Laura mentioned, the site plan. And so the analysis is of course going to be limited. Whereas at the project level environmental analysis, we really hone in what we call footprint impacts, because at that point, you know where the actual structures will be and how, and then you are analyzing the structure's impact on the environment itself. So that's the distinction in my mind.
So is there an example where the program CEQA, I mean, can you give a specific example of the program CEQA allowing you to skip something in the project CEQA? I'm just trying to, because I get this general, like, obviously if it's site specific where I'm going to put a building or something, the program's not going to have anything to say about that because it doesn't even know it in advance. But it sounded like what you're saying is there are some things that because the program CEQA exists, you don't have to do in the project CEQA. And what would be an example of that? Is that clear? You see what I'm trying to ask?
Yes, it's hard to answer specifically or to come up with an example. So just kind of there are certain topic areas that are covered under CEQA that we can be quite sure are not an environmental issue in this community because of the nature of this community. So there's certain topic areas where in our analysis, we say, there's really no chance of a significant impact here. And just because of the nature of what that thing is. And so then when we come back for a project, we're like, oh, we don't have to look at that close. We can be sure that it's not going to be an issue. So does anyone have an example from our team of something like that?
I think mostly single family homes are good examples. We typically don't do additional environmental analysis on single family homes, because we know that as a general rule, the types of air quality, traffic, cultural resources, historic resources, the program level document will detail all of that. And so there's really not a need to do a project specific further environmental analysis on a single family home, unless there are, maybe the site has a creek running through it. And that clearly would not have been analyzed in the program level document.
Okay, so who makes the determination of whether you need further CEQA analysis? In this case, on this little p project level?
The town does. And the way that works is the planning and building director, my position, in consultation with the town attorney, create the documents, make the recommendations, and then the approving body is the one that accepts it or adopts it, depending on what that is. So the same way that when we have a planning commission project that we bring to the planning commission, we tell you, we think this project is exempt from CEQA and this is the reason why, or we provide additional material to support an exemption, or we provided an environmental document that goes with the project. And then it is adopted with the project by the decision-making body.
So then, in this case, you would say, because we already talked about this at the program level, we don't need to talk about the project level. And that's what we come to the governing body.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. yeah.
Okay, great. And then, just so I understand, you guys, what we're going through tonight, there are only certain areas that we were actually describing. Is that because there was stuff there and in the rest there wasn't anything there, or you cherry picked those? And again, going back to this program versus project level, if I had a project that had something outside of the 6 or 8, I forget how many were on that list, but you see what I'm getting at? Like, the list that you gave wasn't all of the, I'll say elements, I'm not sure I'm using the technical term here, but it wasn't all the elements under CEQA. There were only certain ones. In the actual final mitigated negative declaration, will they all be listed and just some of them, they'll just be X's in the no impacts? Is that the way it works?
Well, they're all in the document. We just didn't include them all in the presentation.
Great, okay, great. I just wanted, so that's just a presentation.
Yeah,
concept.
just the
Okay.
presentation were the things we thought the community would be most interested in
Okay,
tonight.
great, thank you. Then my next question is, how do we do this IS mitigated negative declaration without a safety element? Like, we won't even have it. So what does it mean to go forward? Like, at least the housing element, we've got this draft, it's gone to HCD. I mean, people can agree or disagree with it, but at least it's fairly clear what it is. The safety element feels to me like it's way kind of less far along, so to speak. So how do we move forward with the mitigated negative declaration, given that the safety element is part of that? If I understood what you were saying, is that okay?
So when we worked on the schedule, we imagined that those documents would be adopted at the same time. So we embarked on this all together because of the efficiencies included in that, and that we were analyzing the housing element and the safety element together to the best of our ability. And so we do have the draft safety element. Now it's only in committee review right now, so it certainly could change before it's adopted. So the ISMND analyzes what we have before us today. And then if there are changes to the safety element that require a change to the ISMND, we would have to do what's called an addendum to that before the safety element could be adopted. So there has to be adequate environmental review of the safety element before it can be adopted. So we're still packaging this environmental document all together, and it could be adopted based on the information that's available when the housing element is adopted. And then if it's not no longer sufficient, when the safety element is adopted, we'd have to do an addendum to it.
So we, in a sense, re-adopt the ISMND. I mean, that's what the addendum effectively is doing, is you're reapproving it with this addendum because you need to get the safety element in there. The approved safety element, is that? Because I think what I'm hearing is we're going to approve it with sort of kind of a vague sense of what the safety element is. And then later, and who knows what later is, I mean, it could be another 6 months from now. We're going to come up with the safety element. At that point, we're going to go back and look at the ISMND and say, oh, here's how it might change that analysis. And then we'd have to reapprove the ISMND through an amendment process.
So technically, you don't reapprove the ISMND. You are looking at the addendum, and the addendum analyzes whether there are any significant changes that would affect the ISMND. It might be that the safety element is so different from the original version that you actually have to make changes to the ISMND. In which case we would recirculate the ISMND, and the Planning Commission and Council would then readopt it. But what we envision is that most of the changes that will occur through the committee structure are going to be refinements and clarifications that will not necessarily impact the substance of the public review version of the safety element. But that could change through the public review process.
And remembering that we're looking only at the CEQA topic areas and whether there's a significant impact under CEQA. So that the safety element could change in a meaningful way and not change the CEQA analysis.
Right, like the fire map might change, but that might not change the CEQA analysis,
Right.
for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great, thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks, Greg. Why don't you go ahead, Judith?
Sure, some general questions following up on Craig's question in terms of a program versus a project. So my questions are informed by the depth and detail of the Wedge EIR, right? We saw a lot of detail in there, and some of the statements in this seem derived from that, but without the supporting evidence. So a random one is people in affordable housing travel less daily trips. I asked the question back then. I didn't think it was accurate, especially when there's no public transportation. Never got an answer. We don't know where that is. And yet in this MND, the same fact is cited. So I'm a little confused on the authority that informs this versus something that's much more comprehensive like the EIR. What is our standard of approval? I mean, is it that we have experts that have told us something? Do we have the ability to challenge the underlying premise? I don't know how to think about that, and that's going to inform some of my comments.
Let me see if I can try to help.
Yeah,
I'll just try.
I then.
This is an environmental document to approve a policy. Set of policies, not a specific thing that's going to get built. So we are analyzing, adding multifamily zoning, adding an affordable housing development. And we generally know the locations, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen at those locations. And we need to know the locations generally, because then we can say, oh, we have these biological resources in certain parts of town. It may or may not be an issue. We've analyzed VMT. You have to know project locations to analyze VMT for reasons that we are really technical. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about when we're doing CEQA for a policy. And so when we're doing that, I would say myself, yes, there is more acceptance of we bring experts together to give us their expert feedback on when you're creating a policy. This is how we analyze the CEQA thresholds that come from the guidelines and the regulatory agencies. And there's assumptions that go into that because there has to be. And so we collect all of that best practice and information and data and evidence together to say this policy overall, we don't think will have a significant impact on the environment with these mitigation measures. Then we come back later and we go into much more detail. If that's warranted under CEQA for a project like the Stanford Wedge, to use that comparison, because we know exactly what that project is.
Okay, that's helpful. But for example, there's the experts that the consultants have concluded that there's minimal effect on aesthetics. Some people in town might disagree that if you have a gateway where you have 50 units instead of the 2 oak trees, that's a minimal aesthetic change or not significant. So I don't know if our task tonight is to say, I question that assumption, or whether it's, yes, the expert said that. Like, I don't know what you're looking for from us, because there are some areas in here that don't seem to reflect our own situation here. And yet I don't know if that's relevant to what you need us to do tonight. So I don't know how to respond. Like, do I note the things that I think like tonight we are asking you questions. So I don't think we're discussing it substantively. So what is it that you need from us? How can we help move this along? But my concern is if I don't raise something that I question, when the project comes along, they'll have already approved it if it's not determined to be something that wasn't before us earlier. So I'm a little torn whether to make comments like that for the record so that when the specific project comes up, we know there is something to look at potentially, or at least consider looking at later. Or whether that will just come along in the ordinary course and I can raise it then. So any guidelines, any thoughts at all on how we can help the process tonight?
Cara, what are your kind of thoughts about that in terms of, how the Planning Commission can be most effective in their comments?
Right. So the purpose, the primary purpose of this meeting is to take public comments on the published MND. And the additional purpose of the meeting is for the Planning Commission to voice any questions regarding the analysis or the assumptions that go into the thresholds of significance, or the conclusions that would require some additional analysis before the adoption of the MND. And because we're on a tight time frame here, it would be helpful to have those comments at this juncture. You can also provide those types of comments and questions at your subsequent meeting when you actually consider adopting the MND. But if we then determine that those comments are so substantive that we would have to amend the MND or come back with some additional responses to those comments, that would delay the time schedule. So we would, if you see any, fatal flaws with respect to those impact categories, we would encourage you to raise them at this juncture. In terms of aesthetics, your particular aesthetics question, that's a perfect example of the type of issue that will be further analyzed at the project level. Because right now, we don't know where, which particular oak trees are going to be removed as part of the Gateway project. Will those oak trees be relocated? How big will the footprint of the building be, et cetera? And so, you certainly could flag those issues, but this document really does not encompass those particular issues. They'll be analyzed at a later time.
And if it's okay with you, you can move on. I'll just whittle down to the handful of questions or areas that I think further supplemental backup would be helpful. And if you circle back, I'll be more efficient next time.
Sounds great. Okay, Nicholas, would you like to go now?
Sure. Just getting back to the first question, how does a project level M&D affect the future CEQA analysis? Cara, are there examples where consistency with zoning and a general plan, for example, that were adopted under a program program M&D, would result in a categorical exemption, like an infill exemption or an affordable housing exemption or residential infill exemption? And the only reason why I bring it up is, because there's certainly, the answer to that, I think, is yes. And I think that there's probably a more fulsome response that you might want to provide. I'm not sure that it has a great deal of bearing on the adequacy of this MND, but
yes,
there's more to it.
That's an excellent point. Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
If you could expand on that, it's not appropriate for me to, please.
Sure. So think of this as an umbrella. We are screening out, or we're trying to examine the possible impacts of all of the 293 units that are encompassed in the housing element. Some of those projects will likely go through additional environmental analysis, such as Ford Field. That's one where at a staff level, we believe that there will be some additional environmental analysis required. There are other projects that housing units, such as I mentioned before, the single family home example, or an ADU. ADUs are exempt from CEQA under state law, so we wouldn't expect to see any ADU project come up for further analysis. Single family homes typically do fall under an exception, but not always. Again, CEQA is a complicated process, and so there are certain exceptions to these standard exemptions, but for the most part, single family homes are exempt from CEQA, and so those types of projects would not undergo additional CEQA review. Now, there's a third category, which is a little bit more complicated, but there are certain projects that housing projects in particular under state law have CEQA exemptions. And that's, for instance, the supportive housing project that for Willow Commons. That was something that had a very unique CEQA exemption. There are also other projects, if, for instance, the town did not comply with submitting a housing element in a timely fashion, then the state law has this provision that certain projects must be approved by right, and that by right includes no CEQA analysis as a repercussion. So there are certainly overall exceptions to the general rule that that most projects will undergo some additional CEQA analysis as they come online. That's there, as I mentioned, there are some unique situations.
So like affordable housing might fall under an affordable housing categorical exemption.
It might if it were 100% affordable, and that exception actually is pretty difficult to comply with, and so we'd have to analyze it, but it could.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and I actually haven't paid attention to the definition of urbanized in the infill exemption, just because it's usually not an issue where
Right.
where I'm
Right,
thinking about it.
exactly. Yeah, it's very fact specific, and in Portola Valley, the standard infill exemptions that you reference don't always apply.
So, and I just wanted to call out that it is more complicated, and an MND that's adopted now has consequences for future entitlements, certainly. The other couple of things that I want just to call out is there issues of consistency. There are different assumptions made throughout the document about the number of people who live in town. And it ranges from 4,289 to 4,607. And in a couple of cases, we include folks from Las Trancas, for example, when we're looking at VMT. We use a lower number, for example, when we look at public services, including for fire response, rather than the larger number. And I don't know if we should be looking at what the fire district numbers are, or whether it's the town itself, or it is a broader area. But the number that we use is 4,289, I think, is what I said. I can receive that far. But in some cases, that's going to have a ripple effect on issues of air quality, of VMT, of GHG impacts, as well as providing services. I don't have a particular opinion in all cases as to how that skews things. If you're looking at a 17% increase in number of units, number of dwellings, residences in town, having a lower number in some cases would suggest that there would be a bigger impact. In other cases, the impact would be smaller. But I would urge our team to go back through and actually make sure that all of your numbers match up properly. The other sorts of things that I think about similarly is the assumptions as to the growth in number of people that will occur. If you take a straight 17% across the board increase, you're going to get a different number than the number that we include. It's not terribly big, but it's like 50 people, which is what, 20%-ish of the total. So just go back through and actually make sure that the numbers are right, and that you feel comfortable in them, because the assumptions aren't called out. Maybe they are in the appendices, but not in the main document. Similarly, when going through the impacts in the other portions of the GP, general plan, for example, in Ford Field, there are ripple effects that are expressly hit in the recreation element, the scenic road highway, in the Alpine scenic corridor, and the open space that will be will be touched. And there are there are policies and objectives that won't be consistent. It's not hard to fix, but you just need to go through and touch them. That was just an easy identification, but I think that you really need to do the same thing for the GP generally, as well as the specific subplans, like again, the Alpine Scenic Corridor, and there are a bunch of other little specific plans throughout the town. So anyway, so those are the sorts of things they look at, and they may or may not ultimately have an effect on what the outcomes are. But the issues of consistency really ought to be scrubbed out. And I'd be happy to talk with you directly offline and sort of point out some of the issues there.
Thanks, Nicholas. You want to go, John?
Sure, except I have no questions.
Oh, okay, that was quick. Okay. Good. I had just a few. Are there specific thresholds for these judgments? Like less than significant? Let me use the trap or the wildfire evacuation was less than 10%. But at what point, you know, if it took 10 times longer, would that trigger significant? Where's the cutoff?
Generally, there are specific thresholds for the different topic areas, and they come from different places. And some of them are locally adopted, some are regional, like I was talking about. The wildfire part is still a new section of CEQA, and so that's an evolving area. And there's a lot of questions about what are the appropriate thresholds of significance related to evacuation in particular. So I don't know if Cara or Carla, you want to add anything else to that?
This is Bob Grandy. I'll just note that I'm not aware of any city or county in Northern California that has adopted a quantitative threshold for evacuation time estimates.
Okay. And then I guess that leads to my question. If you could run the thought experiment, like if you hired 10 different companies to do this analysis on this at the same moment, how similar or different would they be? Are there some consultants or experts that would judge things, let me call it leniently, and others that would be very harsh? Or are the standards kind of understood, maybe not all written down, but through case law, that people would kind of come out to the same place if they did the same thing?
I think there are professional standards that are typical in traffic engineering, especially the parts of it that have existed for a long time. Those are pretty standard. There's always going to be assumptions, but you're going to get pretty consistent answers because of the professional standards. For the more evolving fields, you may get a little bit more variety. The town is leading on evacuation study and planning. Fair and Peers is a lead transportation consultant. Professionally speaking, they come with the highest reputation. Honestly, we're very fortunate that they're even working with us on these projects because they pass on a lot of work. And so they represent what we consider to be, you know, very high level experts in terms of bringing the best practices, that some of those are new. So that's the way I would describe it in general. I don't know, Bob, if you want to add on to that based on your experience.
No, the only thing I would add is that's one of the reasons why when we work through the evacuation study and we work through with the Emergency Preparedness Committee, we presented a range of different results. So we didn't come in and say the evacuation time is going to be X, because there's so many different variables in terms of what could happen during evacuation time. We looked at different scenarios. Within those scenarios, we provided a range based on how the roadway could be affected from a capacity standpoint. So there's not just one number that we produce a range, and that's meant to capture the fact that there are a lot of variables in terms of what might happen in the case of an evacuation. The only thing I would say is that we did assume 100% evacuation, which based on all the data that we've seen from other wildfires is conservative, because we know that there are individuals who won't evacuate during a wildfire, even once a notice is given. So we tried, when there was a question about underlying data, to err on the side of the conservative nature. And even from the standpoint of the temporal distribution of trips, the time in which the evacuation started, the EPC wanted to go with a more conservative assumption, which assumed 85% of residents would leave home within an hour of an evacuation notice. And that's fairly aggressive in terms of folks getting out the door within 1 hour of a notice. We had 97% leaving within 2 hours. So these are the kind of things we looked at, all the underlying assumptions, and ran them through the EPC, and we had 3 different hearings to talk about those with the EPC. So we tried to be as transparent as possible in terms of what was going into the model, and the kind of results that were coming from it. So.
No, thank you. And for me, I get that one was easy for me to latch on to because it was quantitative. So that feels easy to look at. You know, there were other ones, like I looked at the biological section where there's some special animals in town, which we all love the animals, right? But it's just hard for me to judge, like, oh, is that animal going to get hurt? And will that make a significant effect on the biology? I guess I'm just wondering how, if many experts looked at the same situation, would they kind of all agree? Yeah, that's not significant. Or would some be like, oh my gosh, the little salamander, no, we got to stop.
Great question. Thank you. And that it's right. Because could you just have a pet animal and that it's
Right.
significant because that's your favorite?
Right.
That's your favorite dog.
Exactly.
Great question. Thank you. Carla, I don't know if you can speak to that, or we were going to see if one of our sub-consultants could call in, but he was coming from another meeting, I believe. So we do have a couple phone calls, people on the phone. I just don't know if one of them happens to be our biological consultant.
Yeah, I don't think I see him on here. But I do think, given the number of just like the standards that exist in the municipal code and the general plan, plus all of the protected species, this is kind of coming back to that standard that experts would agree and have been using for many years.
Yeah, because there's well-documented lists, right?
Right.
Categories of how
Right.
protected the different species are. So
Exactly.
the biologists are going to use the same references for what level those different types of species need to be protected at.
Through the chair, if I may, and Cara, I want your help here. I
Yeah,
just want to point out that 45% of mitigated negative declarations, only 45% of mitigated negative declarations in litigation that are appealed survive. The rest of them fail because they're found to be inadequate. Cara, it might be a good time to talk a little bit about what the standard is for the adequacy. I think that goes generally to the chair's question. By the way, I think that the consultant team here is really top shelf. It's a great group of people. And nice job in selecting them. Good folks, smart, people who you would look for. But Cara, what is the standard of review here?
Yes, so
And what is the
Generally,
standard of review?
yes. What the court generally looks at is whether a fair argument can be made that an impact is significant and unavoidable, and instead of a negative declaration, an environmental impact report should have been prepared. And so when you're looking at what types of a fair argument, what types you look at expert testimony. And if the overall record shows that the town relied on experts in the field, and that the criteria that was selected to analyze the impacts is grounded on the CEQA guidelines or on a regulatory standard that it was promulgated by the appropriate regulatory agency, and that there has been sufficient analysis, courts will uphold that the negative declaration. On the other hand, if the town relied on a standard that doesn't really have any clear acceptance, it's not accepted by the experts in the field, it's not codified in the regulations, then a court would have a problem with that, especially if there's other evidence in the record to show that that was not an appropriate standard to use, or if the analysis that was employed in the document was not appropriate. So,
and so 55% of the time, the court will find that it's inadequate. So more often than not, for a mitigated negative declaration, the court will make the determination that there was a error which requires a higher standard of evaluation.
yeah, and I'm not familiar with that particular statistic that you're using. Their CEQA litigation also involves not only the substance of the analysis, but there can also be a variety of other procedural issues. You know, maybe a negative declaration was not circulated for the appropriate period of time, and so a court would require the document be circulated, or maybe an MND was struck down because it wasn't distributed to the appropriate agencies. There are a variety of reasons for striking down an MND. So it's, you know, I'm just not familiar with that particular statistic, Nicholas, as to what it encompasses, whether it's just the analysis or whether there are other procedural deficiencies associated with an MND.
I've also seen a lot of bad MNDs written by associate planners without appropriate consultants. That's just honest.
Yes, and I will say that many cities and smaller towns have their, you're right, have MNDs prepared by staff members, and without any particular expertise. They don't even bring in sub-consultants to run a traffic analysis. So you're right, there are a lot of, there's a very big range of quality.
And if we had gotten this analysis done and many things had come back in the really bad category, what would we do then? Would we be able to submit our housing element and just say, best we could do, looks like a few bad effects, too bad we have those bad effects, but
If we would have found significant impacts that could not be mitigated,
yeah,
then we would have to do an EIR and finish an EIR process. And the housing element couldn't be adopted until the EIR was finished.
okay. I get the idea that some people think that if we, I guess maybe hoping that the analysis came out more negative, it might help us get out of our RENA number somehow, or a housing obligation. Or if not this year, maybe it would help us be in a better position in 8 years from now to get a lower number. Is there any merit to that? Like,
I think I understand your question. I think people are wondering whether an environmental document could be used as evidence that the town can't build housing units.
right, and that we should get relief from these high numbers.
Yeah, I do not think that there's that kind of connection in the way that people are talking about RENA numbers and how they're allocated. I did bring up some of these topics way back when the methodology committee was meeting, and I had a chance to meet with one of the representatives of the RENA methodology committee. And I did say to them, you're putting us in a very challenging position, given our, especially the fire danger, and especially with fire being a newer topic area under CEQA. But even in that amount of time, that's about 2 years ago, a year and 9 months ago, maybe. In that amount of time, the CEQA practice has evolved quite a bit. And a lot of people have been doing a lot of good work around this. So we think that we have reflected those best practices that are there. But I don't think that that creates the case that we would not have to satisfy our RENA obligations, or that would necessarily be a way to try to reduce the numbers in the future. I think the ways to do that continue to be the ways that the council has talked about and formed a subcommittee to reach out to the state regulatory agencies at a high level and talk to them, talk to the insurance commissioner and talk to housing and community development and talk to CAL FIRE and bring all those parties together so that the future legislation and the future policies are written in a way that takes that into consideration from the start, as opposed to trying to address it in the end.
No, thank you. That's all my questions.
So, Ann, before we go to your long list, could I go back to that one thing that you were, because it seemed like one of the things I heard you say is for some of these things that was checked to be, less than significant. It seemed like it might be nice if there was a little more like, the reason we picked this was because we looked at the endangered species list and this, so that maybe got a little more information out of the experts so that a layperson could say, yeah, I generally see how you got here. Not that they're going to be a layperson's going to be the final decider, but that's sort of what I heard also is if the public could look at this document and say, one level down, I sort of get how these check boxes got checked. Was that the other thing you were trying to get at?
No, I was looking for a rubric that really said checks. I mean, I think the document's pretty extensive, so it talks about all the things that they looked at.
Well, it sort of does. Well, I don't know. I find it sort of does, but then I find it conclude, like, I can't read through it and go, oh, and now I see how you concluded less than significant. I mean, I just see it says, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't help me get to like how they picked one of those check boxes. Like it seemed like they could have picked a different checkbox and I would have read the same verbiage. So I guess that's all I was wondering is if there's some way to make it a little clearer how a specific checkbox got checked. Because generally it's like, well, we checked for endangered species. So why isn't it like not significant at all versus just a little significant? I don't know. A few of them, it just seems like if general lay people look at this stuff, it's still hard to understand where to check. They just, to me, they seemed a little magical. So I, just as a comment, I don't know if there's anything you guys can do to improve that, but I'd say any place that you can make how the boxes got checked more obvious, or at least a little more direct on, why a particular one was checked, that might be helpful. Thanks. I didn't mean to jump in.
Yep.
No, that's fine. And I kind of agree. I am not challenging that, this report isn't of a high standard or the consultants are not being extremely thoughtful and professional. It's just from a layperson reading it. In the margin, I wrote conclusory. So my comments are going to go into a few areas where if it's not unusual to do so, I would encourage them putting a little more context in if that's appropriate. And I don't know what's appropriate or standard. So I'll go through those. And Laura, thank you for outlining the general plan amendments in the slide. One question on page 12, here it says the land use element will be updated to remove impermissible limits on population control. I don't know if you can kind of give us a preview of what area that is.
Yeah, there's a table in the land use element that talks about persons per acre, like it's density in persons instead of dwelling units. And that's an old standard that's no longer considered acceptable legally and has equity issues as well for people who have different household compositions.
So you would phrase that more in dwelling units at this
Yeah,
point?
just switch the table to
Okay.
dwelling units.
Okay, thank you. One of the areas where it seemed a little conclusory, and again, I'll say this once and I'll stop repeating it, if it's appropriate and would be standard. The commentary, it starts around page 30 on the lighting. And it just says light glare will be consistent with the general environment. I'm paraphrasing there. And I actually think, given the projects we have, Dorothy Ford Field does not fall into that, and Glen Oaks do not fall into that. Those are dark at night. So I think there is, if it's a general urban environment, I get that comment, and I think that's where it derived from. But given that it is really low lighting, as is the Stanford Wedge, I question that. So I'll leave it to the experts whether they enhance that or make that a little more nuanced there. Okay. I was a little confused on the open space at 4388 versus 4370. And one question was, we have to amend to reflect open space changes to open space in 4388. How about 4370? I don't know if you can comment on that, or we can put that aside if it's not relevant to the.
We would have to check,
Okay.
but we'll certainly check.
Okay. Oh, there are references, and this is around this page 76, 77, and 112. That this is like the historical parts that we want to be careful of when we're developing. There's a reference to Dorothy Ford Field as part of a turnpike remnant, and that's interesting to cross the creek. That's an area where I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, is a turnpike, 10 feet and not a big deal, or is a turnpike, 50 feet and it might actually be an important thing to know about in terms of assessing the development and the implications for development in that area. So that's a question. Somebody earlier questions on the Hermit Fault and the earthquake fault, and it's a question of, do we have the right fault map with the right process? That's more of a question, and I'll just leave it out there. But it does seem that since there's so many analyses that trigger off of a earthquake fault and where it is and where you can build around it, I would think we need to be aware of what happened there in order to weigh in on the final report here. Page 106, it says several of the, or at least a couple of the sites are intersected by liquefaction hazards. Again, similar to the turnpike, how big? Like, are these minor things to be worked around and drained appropriately or mitigated somehow? Or are they larger? I'm implying that they're pretty minimal because they probably would have said, but it would probably be good to add that context if it's an appropriate thing to do. I didn't know there was a environmental release at Dorothy Ford Field, and they say there's an adequate distance. It's been cleaned up, is my interpretation, and it's an adequate distance from Glen Oaks or Dorothy Ford Field. But I'd like to know what that means. Is it a big deal? Adequate distance. It would be good to have some backup or detail in the plan for that. And similarly, the map that's used for fire in the safety element, do you know if they did use the Moritz map, if any of these sites would be treated differently? That's a question I have. You don't have to answer it now, but it's for the future. On the evacuation pieces, it says planning on a single car. It might be good to confirm where that comes from. I know when my husband and I were thinking about evacuating, we were planning on 2 cars and we're only 2 people. So like, is that built into the evacuation plan? Is it something that might evolve?
2 cars per household.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's sort of, that was the assumption that
Yeah.
we looked at. was
Okay.
2 cars per household.
Okay, because
So
it
there's a
said
full-
1 in here.
Yeah, well, at least one of the things we tried to study. So yeah, I don't know about this one, but at least
Yeah.
one place we tried to study.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it said, and then 400 and there's a reference in here. I'll get to 401 additional trips and a full town-wide evacuation, but we're adding 700 people. So, you know, I would like to see the linkage between the number of people, the evacuation plan, and, you know, the 15 minutes, it would be helpful for some context here. I understand it's evolving. I'm not looking for precision, but to me, 15 minutes can be a big deal. So I would think enhancing explanation around that not being significant would be necessary. Then the last ones. I also noted Nicholas's question or observation of the different numbers for population increase, current population, West Tranco's population. So really think that would be very helpful for people. And then I did note that the Stanford EIR was used as a citation for an authority late, pretty far in, I think it was page 295. Is that okay? Like, are we able to use it? Is it the town's EIR that we are able to use for these points of reference for other projects too? I just was curious.
Self-reference
Yeah.
or circular reference or something.
Yeah. it's a little
Depends on the
odd.
type of reference. It's actually really common for environmental
okay.
documents to reference each other, but it depends on for what. So if there's
Okay.
already been an assumption made or a standard set or a threshold set that's been previously considered by the town, then sometimes we want to do that for consistency. Or if something was learned through another document, then we reference that. So it is oftentimes acceptable.
But in this particular case, you didn't find it out of normality.
No, in this particular case, we found it to be
Okay.
typical.
Okay, thank you. Good to mind.
Great, that's everything from the planning commission?
I wanted to note that we do have the biologist on the phone. If someone wanted to ask any questions, would you like to bring them in? Okay, so we're gonna make you a panelist
So, did you want to?
or allow him to talk. Oh, did people have questions for him?
Yeah, I mean, I was curious on how the standards are, but I don't need it. Well, no, I guess, you know what I'd like to, if we heard from 10 different biologists, how close would their answers be? That would be interesting to hear them.
Okay.
So,
Okay, Jim, are you there?
well, maybe it's the bee. I know that there's a special bee nearby.
Jim, if you're there, if you could unmute on your side.
Is it *9? What's the? I feel like there's a button you have to push in order to. If you're dialing in. Oh, what is it?
It is *6 to mute and unmute if you're dialing in. So Jim,
Okay.
*6. Maybe.
I'll text him too.
Can you just unmute him? Are you the host?
He's unmuted on our side. I'm asking him to unmute, but he has to do it on his phone.
You drive and throw that in there.
So he's trying and it's not working. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, he ran over the salamander though.
I know, don't say that.
Okay, so I think we'll move on since it wasn't super critical. But Jim, if you're able to connect, then you know what the chair's question was and we can pick that back up later if we're able to.
Great, so we'll move on to public comments. And as Laura mentioned at the beginning, normally in our meetings, we take public comments and then Laura, Cara, one of us tries to answer the questions after we collect them all, but that's not the case today. We're going to collect the questions and they will get answered in a later document.
Yeah, we really want to think about comments. So think about if there's areas of the analysis or the mitigation measures. I think the planning commissioners have been a very good example of how they've looked at the document and analyzed it. So if there's things that you saw when you were reading the document that wasn't clear to you, didn't understand the assumptions, conclusions, or mitigation, that's especially helpful kind of feedback. And so we'll be responding to those things. We won't necessarily be able to answer every single question, but we will respond to all of the groups of the environmental issues that are raised. Great, thank you, Laura.
Well,
Good.
and I think you got to the right thing. It's really not questions, it's comments. You're going to
Comments, yeah.
respond to the comments and make sure appropriate comments get embedded in the document.
Yes, in the
Rather
response to
than there's
comments.
going to be a list of 500 questions that somehow you're going to answer.
Correct. We are not going to list 500 questions and answer them.
Right.
This is about comments on the environmental document.
Now, are there any questions that you would answer through an FAQ independent of the ISMND, like that we would maybe post on the website? Because there's kind of two things going on here. One is the specifics we're trying to get at. And then the other is, to the degree we can, is help the public understand the process. So I would say if the public in this open forum asks a question that's more about the process, maybe we can put that question on an FAQ and post it someplace so that we don't
Yes.
have to keep answering it over and over again.
We can definitely respond to process questions in an FAQ.
Yeah, perfect.
definitely.
Yeah, I think that, so comments
Mhm.
for the document and then questions for FAQ.
Yeah. Okay, great. I see some people on Zoom, so we'll start with Rita on Zoom first.
Hi, I'll be quick since my comment is long. I came to Portola Valley for the same reasons as so many others: the rural character of the town, streams, animals, unique topography, trees. This is our hometown. CEQA should be considered for any project that happens in this town. I feel uncomfortable with the constant threat of, if we don't approve, developers will be able to come in and build whatever they want, ignoring CEQA guidelines. I can't imagine that a building could be built in this town that might dam a stream, build in a canyon, paint it purple, and have it look like a burger house. Portola Valley is not on an island, and all the puzzle pieces of our neighboring towns need to be considered. And I haven't been hearing that. An example is for evacuation. The roundabouts that are being proposed in Ladera that our past mayor helped Ladera get, and Los Altos Hills is using a restradero for evacuation, that people would be then coming onto Alpine Road. It makes me wonder if the big picture of all the housing projects, ours and our neighbors, are being considered in the evacuation plan. And for VMT, there's no bus service in town, and it's been discontinued. A lot of it's been cut in the past year. To get food, to travel to a job, drop off a child to school, go to the doctor, you're going to have to drive. And are we prepared for that? I'm not hearing that in all of the talk. And this town has been the lead agency for the Stanford Wedge DER. That project, the comments for that project were closed in May 2022, but we have not had any updates. And there were many sections that were in the DEIR that raised questions, but then stated that there was no impact, when there clearly is impact, but there is no follow-up for the residents, for the community on those. And I understand that there is a time restriction for this document, but if we have all of these other pressing documents that the town cannot get in on a timely manner, for a variety of reasons, what is the priority on this one over all the other pending documents? And yes, we've hired many exceptional consultants, but they seem to be spread out pretty thin by working on our many town projects. And perhaps we need to clear up some of the old projects instead of trying to patch possible holes in the projects that are not finished. Thank you for listening. And please, let's do something about this so that we can save this town and keep it safe, not just for the new people, but for the current residents in this town. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Go ahead, Ellen. Okay, no, got to come to the mic, sorry. Recorded for posterity,
One or that one, or doesn't
Oh,
matter.
either one, they're both on.
Yeah, this is a process question and it has to do with Laura's answer at the beginning of this discussion. I'm just saying, what is the point of having a general plan if it can just be indiscriminately changed if there's a certain proposed development? And I'd like to know what the process is. Who, is it the town council that changes this? Is it the planning commission that makes the changes? Is it town employees that makes the changes to the general plan? Are the people in town invited to have their input on this? Who is in charge of changing the general plan and who has the power to do it? If I'm not going to get an answer now, where would this be posted? Because I know a lot of people that I've been discussing this with want to know the answer.
Great.
Thanks.
So we'll collect up, maybe we will answer the questions that are process questions at the end of after we hear all the questions.
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, so we'll answer it tonight. Let's see, on the phone or Zoom, Valerie Baldwin.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I wanted to second the November 11th letter sent to you by Rusty Day. It's really well written and he brings up some many good points. I want to call your attention in particular to the changes in the maps that he referenced. The Moritz map, fire map, was incorporated in our general plan, but was replaced by an older, discredited CAL FIRE map, which changes Portola Valley from high fire hazard to no fire hazard. And also the removal of faults from the fault map. We've never gotten an answer on why that has happened. Both changes could allow buildings where they should not be. And now that the cat's out of the bag, our town might be liable if those homes are damaged. I'd like to add one other footnote on page 61 of the IS conservation element, which was cut and pasted from our old general plan. Number 2 states, and I dropped a few of the words out, to preserve and protect all nature plants with special attention to the preservation of unique communities such as oak woodlands. In the Stanford Wedge EIR, they have proposed to remove a very large number of oaks from an oak woodland. In fact, it's 177 trees. And that was by a survey by Stanford consultant Hort Sciences. And 123 of those trees are over 100 years old. This cannot be mitigated with just a few young trees. Yet the IRR says that this has no significant impact. So I was really wondering when we were talking about tonight about what no insignificant impact really means. This obviously is a serious impact on the area, removing a large oak woodland there. So how do we come about saying things are no significant impact? I'll follow up this with a formal letter by the end of the month. So thank you.
Thank you. Great. Next we have Dana on Zoom.
Unmute, I got it.
We can hear you.
Okay. Hold on a sec. Okay, you guys, I'm happy to have somebody else talk about the general plan because you know that's my thing. So, I mean, this is a massive process issue for me. We are, because the town has a general plan, which is our constitution. And all these meetings and reports, we the people don't hear much about our constitution, the general plan. Yes, there was a housing element committee and we listened to that, but we never really talked about changes to the plan. We haven't discussed changes to the safety element. The general plan is a large largely an integrated document, which is all tied together and internally consistent. The objective section of the plan, however, in each element and the entire section set the tone for the ethos of the town. The basic concepts and objectives for any changes to the general plan should be developed through an open public process from the community has input to, and that objectives document should be approved by the planning commission and the council after public input, and then serve as a guide as you proceed to consider actual revisions to the general plan and any update to the housing element. You need to have a solid pathways document that lets everyone know where the community agrees it wants to go, and then use that as a measure to ensure any changes achieve the basic agreed upon objectives. This is a town effort and not something that should be driven by a particular vision of staff. So are you saying that you plan to make changes to the general plan by December 13th without a full public review of word changes to the plan? If you've got your back up against the wall, and I've been asking this for years to take a look at this. So, and I know that you guys, I've talked to members of the planning commission that you have pledged to review every word change. But for me, the general plan, yes, is the Constitution, and I want it followed. And I want the people to be involved in any changes to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Hey, Laura and maybe Carla, we have a phone number up here that's doesn't have a hand raised, but it's popping up to the top of the list.
That's the biologist.
Should I take that now?
No, he wasn't able to come through, so we're just
Oh,
gonna leave
okay.
him there.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Next is the phone number that ends 7562. Is that Caroline?
Thank you very much. Yes, this is Caroline Bertongen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I sympathize with all my residents who have raised the issues. I am tired. We have spent, 10 years now on several issues. We thought that the town council would follow the general plan, and they have not. I'm tired of hearing staff saying to the best of our ability. Unfortunately, that has not happened. I will just add another issue. The CEQA. There's one section of CEQA that also implements the cumulative impact under CEQA ruling. And again, it's not mentioned tonight. I urge you to demand that all the laws that rule, that govern CEQA guidelines are being submitted to you so you understand. Don't rely on staff. I know these are young people. They all have to earn a living, and they do, according to what they're saying, the best of their ability. We have CEQA specialists in town who know the stuff, and I think it's time that we hired a CEQA analyst. I've rewritten my notes 3 or 4 times, depending on what I heard. And I appreciate the questions of the commissioners. But if the commissioners don't know what's going on, then how can you actually decide on policies? It's really a mess. Like Dana says, we're a community. We had governing rules, and it's time that we abide to this. Every document that has submitted to another government agency was misrepresenting our data. And how many times in the last 5 years have we addressed this to how many committees that every time you use a consultant, they misrepresented the data? This cannot continue. This is not who we are. We are a very unique community. We have a general plan, like Dana said, and it's time that staff, town council abide to these rules. And I'm sorry that I'm upset, but you know what? I have spent several years like many other residents, and it's time that you abide by our rules. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see, next Nan Shostak on Zoom.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You are, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good evening, commissioners, and real congratulations to Commissioners Haskell and Taylor. I'm a member of the Geologic Safety Committee, but my comments tonight are my own, not those of the committee. I've got two comments on the ISM&D from a geologist's point of view. First, the document as it's written is inadequate because it's unclear. Regardless of assurances to the contrary tonight, the ISM&D could be interpreted as taking priority over all other environmental analyses of individual development projects under CEQA. If approved as written, the study could obviate any future CEQA analysis. Any developers, current or future, could argue that the finding of no significant impact for geologic and seismic hazard for the totality of the project, that's with a capital P, all developments taken together, applies to their own projects. Therefore, those projects would not be required to undergo environmental analysis. If we rely solely on the safety elements, geologic and seismic hazard provisions, as the initial study does, we cannot ensure the geologic and seismic safety of future projects. We also need the protections of a second analysis under CEQA. Blue Oaks is an example. The San Andreas Fault runs right through the property. The developer's trenching study reported no evidence of faulting. The town's requirements under the safety element were satisfied, and the developers were prepared to proceed with their project as planned. At that point, residents of Portola Valley and Las Trancas Woods convinced the town that the report's conclusion was extremely improbable. The town ordered a second trenching study in which the San Andreas Fault trace was found exactly where expected. Only because the second review was done was a new home sited safely and not directly on top of a known active fault. The second point, the initial study is incorrect in that it assumes the 2017 versions of the town's geologic and ground movement potential maps are the authoritative maps for geologic and seismic hazard. There are two issues here. First, these maps are not static. They're living dynamic documents. The initial study and the safety element should always refer to the most current version of the maps, not to the static 2017 revision. Second, the town's maps are supposed to show the best and most recent interpretations of geologic and seismic hazards, but the maps have increasingly and importantly diverged from the hazard maps published by the California Geological Survey and the United States Geological Survey. This divergence is particularly clear for inferred faults, not the known active faults. Both the initial study and the safety element must consider the CGS and USGS maps, as well as the town's most current maps, to determine geologic and seismic hazard. Thank you.
Thanks, Nan. And we're to our last, oh, let me take a speaker here. Go ahead, Bob.
I have a question just to start. In the last meeting, you were talking about zoning, and this meeting, you're not talking about zoning. So I'd like to know when zoning comes back, just so I have an idea of when that's appropriate for us to be able to deal with. And secondly, one of the things that in looking over and listening about CEQA, the general plan has been developed over many years, but I just suggest to the Planning Commission that the general plan is the consolidated thought of what the residents want. Now, if that's what they want, then when we do the HCD zoning and changes that we're going to do, I'd like to make sure that the general plan as it's written now is thought through each time we're going to make one of those changes. And I'll give you just one example. Just one example is you have a creek and there's an argument over the creek. There's a creek at 4370. The general plan shows it as a creek, but it doesn't name it as a creek. So to me, now there seems to be a creek there. But those kind of things, I'd like to know when we're making the changes from that general plan to whatever it is that we're going to do for the housing element and the zoning. And any comment on when that zoning discussion would be? Because it doesn't really lay out, you say you're going to have these meetings, but it doesn't say which one's going to be zoning. So whenever you could help us understand when that's going to be, we'd like to suggest some zoning suggestions. Thank you.
Good, we'll go to, on Zoom, Betsy Morgan Taylor.
Good evening, commissioners, and I want to add my congratulations to everyone else's, to both Craig and Judith. Well, thank you for what is cumbersome work, and I'm a newbie at program CEQAs, and the format makes it extremely hard for me, at least, to get a foothold here. So just a general observation, that when I'm flying at 30,000 feet, almost everything looks insignificant and fuzzy. So I turned to peer municipalities, trying to understand how others approached this same process. And I found 5 examples. I didn't look beyond that. And in terms of their organization and presentation, one means that every one of the 5 CEQA plans presented, and one that each one included, so it was standard in all the cases, were multiple summary tables. They appeared in the first 20 pages of a multiple 100-page document. These summary tables were a grid. They delineated each project by name, each project by impact, and next to that, there were associated mitigation measures that were going to be taken. So when I looked at our document for something that was similar, and again, so that I could get some kind of a foothold, some specifics, we didn't have anything like that. And for my taste, it would have helped me a great deal in a means of approaching commentary. It's still high level, as I guess this is intended to be, but it was far more grounding. I do want to ask a few questions about, they're kind of perfunctory questions, some of them, but about the high level nature. Does HCD mandate that we assume this broad program CEQA study, or is that at the discretion of each municipality? Could we instead do program by program studies if we so choose? Whether or not it's practical, could we in fact do it that way? Secondly, what is HCD's deadline for the CEQA study? I looked for it long enough that I'll put the question back to you because I couldn't find it. And theoretically, I guess this is back to the question that I just posed. Theoretically, could we in fact accept as a first case a program study if that is what is required, but subject to conditions that the commissioners may or may not choose to put out there that would include mandatory follow-up with project CEQA studies down the road. So thank you for those, what I think are process questions. So if I received an answer tonight, that would be fabulous. Thanks so much for your attention and for your work.
Thanks, Betsy. Next, we have Dale Fowl on Zoom.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. My congratulations to Craig and Judith, of course. And I'm going to also thank Craig for bringing up the safety element in this discussion, because as you all know, we're in the process of the review. And as a personal statement, I find the safety element extremely wanting. It, of course, relies on an outdated fire map. We should be using the Mort's map as a placeholder, and we do expect to get new fire maps maybe as soon as January. And so therefore, the safety element is going to be considerably different than what is currently presented. And to have this document, the environmental document, rely on a draft safety element that I find wanting seems kind of silly to me. A lot of work probably is going nowhere. So I think you need to pay attention to that and to the timeline there too. We had a meeting of a subcommittee of the EPC discussing the safety element, and it could be months actually before we finalize the safety element based upon the commentary. So please take that into consideration. It's very important that we get this right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Bill. Okay, now maybe lastly, we have Carol Russell, but I think it's usually Bill.
Not to confuse you, this is Carol Russell.
You're tricking me.
And amazingly, Bill has conceded his 3 minutes to me. So I will be speaking tonight. First of all, I would like to thank the participants who called in to speak with respect to the safety element, the geological issues, and the evacuation issues. I think that all of them put together show that there's some fundamental errors to the IS and the underlying data. And I think the Planning Commission should look closely at that. The general plan recognizes the existence of the Applewood-Nathorst neighborhood. It consists of 27 homes. The IS describes 11 different areas within the town, yet there's absolutely no mention of our neighborhood or the environmental impact on the neighborhood arising from the proposed zoning, allowing 3-story structures at 4370 and 4394 Alpine. The environmental impacts are real, and these are impacts that are program related, not project related, because they are creatures of the zoning ordinances themselves, and not as a result of the particular development of a single parcel. Both 4370 and 4394 are adjacent to and literally back up to single-family residences in the neighborhood. 4370 contains 0.8 acres of open space described in the general plan as Greenway, Creek, Open Space, and Park. The general plan also describes the creek located on this property and calls for its protection. For decades, the residents of our neighborhood have benefited from this open space as a noise and light shield from the nearby commercial development, as well as protection for wildlife and protection of the vistas and views across the open space into Windy Hill. Principle 9 of the open space element of the general plan provides that open space along creeks, streams, and scenic trails should be protected with the help of development setbacks, conservation easements, public acquisition of such properties as appropriate. We also need to remember that the general plan states that open space can be on private land and that the size of the open space is irrelevant to the protection that needs to be afforded. Nothing in the IS seems to address these issues and concerns. It has been suggested that not only should there be new zoning ordinances, but that the general plan should be amended to reflect the zoning changes. The general plan is this town's Bible. It sets forth the hallmark principles on which this bucolic community was founded. The initial study completely fails to address this issue, nor does it discuss how and under what circumstances a general plan can be amended. And I note that many other speakers want to know the same thing. In its draft plan, the town has designated 9 units for 4370 Alpine. These are not necessary to reach the 253 RHNA units. If they are deleted, there will still be 31 proposed units beyond the required 253 units. If the town still believes that it needs these 9 units, then market rate ADUs with no deed restrictions can be employed to make up the shortfall. There is internal confusion concerning the proposed zoning for 4370. 9 units are proposed based on 6 units per acre. That is what is in the draft element. The draft element describes the property as 1.5 acres. However, the property is 2.4 acres. So to get to 9 units, it would be sufficient to zone the property for 4 units per acre. Now, some of the comments I've just made with respect to 4370 were based on the existence of dedicated open space on the land as reflected in the Nathorst area triangle diagram, which is part of the general plan. However, I heard in the beginning of the Planning Commission meeting, Laura Russell say that the map was going to be changed to eliminate the open space. Was this because there never was open space and the map needs to be corrected? Or is the map being changed for the purpose of eliminating existing open space? And if the latter, by what authority does she have the right to unilaterally remove open space from the general plan? Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. The 2008 Moritz map has been the official fire hazard map in our general plan since 2010, and it serves as a basis for fire safety policies. To inform the Department of Housing and Community Development that the 2008 CAL FIRE map represents our fire hazards, as the town did in August, is a dramatic departure from what's defined in our general plan. And I'm wondering what the legal basis and by what legal authority the defined hazard map in our general plan was ignored. Fire Marshal Bullard and Fire Safety Consultant Zeke Ludner both indicated to the Housing Element Committee in January that the 2008 Moritz map is the best hazard assessment we have for fire hazard. And if anything, it understates our hazard. The Woodside Fire Protection District calls the 2008 CAL FIRE map unsafe and inaccurate. In rewriting our safety policies to be based on the CAL FIRE map, policies are eliminated from up to 83% of Portola Valley's area. To be clear, it's not all fire safety policies that are eliminated. It's just the most restrictive ones, the ones that have been reserved for our most dangerous areas. Those are the ones being eliminated from large areas of Portola Valley. Why is the impact on wildfire risk of the change in hazard map and elimination of fire safety policies from large areas of Portola Valley not evaluated in the EIS? After repeated queries about the rationale for changing the fire hazard map, we still don't have an answer. The mayor indicated that the 2008 CAL FIRE map was being used as a placeholder while we wait for updated maps. But that's simply a restatement that the Moritz map is being replaced by the CAL FIRE map. It's not an explanation for the reason for the change. The planning director indicated that state law requires that the CAL FIRE map be analyzed, but the government code she cites does not require that the CAL FIRE map be adopted as our official fire hazard map in the general plan or serve as a basis for fire safety policies. What is the reason for selecting such a inaccurate and unsafe map? What is the reason for eliminating fire safety policies from large areas of the valley? I'd like to ask a couple clarifying questions. One process question. Understand that the town will respond to resident comments by, I think it was December 15th. And my question is, what happens if residents feel that that response is inadequate? What recourse do residents have? Comment was made that if the CEQA review goes into an EIR process, the housing element couldn't be adopted until that EIR process is complete. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on what that process is and how long it would take and what the ramifications would be if we are not able to adopt our housing element. Thank you.
Okay, I think that, oh gosh, come on. Everybody wants to be the last speaker. Is that it?
No, I hope there are more.
Yeah, you're not the last.
Thank you. Rusty Day, and I began my comments this evening during the public session by speaking about the integrity of governance. Now I want to talk with you about the integrity of our CEQA review. And I want to talk about the integrity of the secret review because I want to address my comments to the Planning Commission, not the staff, not the consultants. I want to talk with you about your role in this process and your responsibility in this process. You are the ones who are charged with defining whether we are performing an appropriate CEQA review of the changes that we're proposing. We're looking to you, the residents, to protect our interests to ensure that this process is performed correctly with integrity. And I think, what does that mean to have a integrity in the CEQA review? I think we all can understand whether a house or a product is well-designed, well-built, with quality materials and craftsmanship so it will last for a long time. Now let's take a look at the CEQA review that this initial study that you're looking at. And let's think about some of the questions that Commissioner Taylor, Commissioner Targ asked tonight. Is this premature? We don't even have a safety element to look at. We don't even know what our safety policies are going to be or what our hazards are going to be. And we're doing a hazard assessment in an initial study without that information? Isn't that a little bit premature? We don't have the zoning districts that we're going to adopt, defined and laid out on a map, so we don't know where they are. We don't know what parts of town they're going to affect. Isn't that a little premature and indefinite and inspecific? How do you assess the environmental impact of a district you don't even know the boundaries of? We've got no approved wording for the changes that we're going to be making in the general plan, let alone the safety element or the housing element. And yet we're going to assess their environmental impact and we don't know what they are. The other point that I want to raise about the integrity of this review was brought out, I think, most clearly by Commissioner Targ. We're told tonight that this is not a project review, despite what the document says. It's a program review. Well, why doesn't it say that? Why isn't that distinction explained in the initial study? Why aren't we informed and educated that this is a program review, not a project review? The document says it's a project review and it sweeps within the scope of that project every development project, including the Sanford Wedge, including Ford Field, every development project that's in the pipeline or proposed. If this is in fact a program review, that should be specifically called out, and you should insist on language in this initial study that makes very clear what the effect of this program review will be on all pipeline, pending, and future development projects. You should clarify. That's your responsibility. That's the Planning Commission's responsibility. Staff hasn't done it. You need to.
Thanks. Thank you, Rusty. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to speak? Hey, Christy, we're going to let you finish up. You're on.
Oh, hopefully I'm not the last because this is an important topic and the more that can speak, the better. I wanted to thank the commissioners who asked questions. I think you are the ones that need to ask questions to protect our environment. We only have 3 minutes to talk. You can take it longer, and I expect that. I do think that 401 additional trips seems low with 700 plus residents. Maybe we should look at the days of the week and the times of the day and the date that these were done. Should they be redone if they are older dates? I'm concerned about the the effects over time rather than each project giving it a negative, mitigated negative declaration per project. We need to look at all the projects together and look at the I'm trying to say the effects over many years, not just for that individual project, which is what we're being told to do. Look at each project, then we'll decide. No, we need to look at the whole plan together and make sure we look at the cumulative effects. I believe we should hire a CEQA land use specialist to make sure the proposal of mitigated negative declaration is exactly what we should do and take recommendations accordingly. I think we should look at the report from the Fish and Wildlife that was done for the Stanford Wedge on May 13th. And that should be a part of this study. We should also ask the Water Board to be involved and be consulted, because we have the river running behind some of these projects and through some of these projects. I do believe that the Fish and Wildlife called out the tributaries. They said if a project would impact the unnamed tributaries to Los Trancos Creek or any other streams or associated riparian habitat, then the project would be subject to LSA notification requirements as further described below. So there also is many animals that are fully protected in this report, and I will just name a few. So they found that the San Francisco garter snake is fully protected, and it's a year-round cycle. And the construction maintenance activities have a potential result in direct and indirect. If you have direct or indirect take or indirect take of any of these at any stage of their life cycle through the construction of roads and loss of habitat, then these are fully protected. So that is
Thanks,
one.
Christy. Okay, is that it? Thanks, Christy.
No.
And I'm not trying to discourage anybody.
Well, then ask the questions for us, because you can talk longer. Really, please ask these questions. Please.
So,
read
Christy,
this
we
report.
have a procedure. You can send comments in and they'll all get either before meetings, but in this process, before there's a date, there's a 30-day open period. So definitely put your comments into those.
We're trying to let others hear us and start thinking
They
themselves.
can read the comments too. I'm going to stick with the 3 minutes. But if anybody else would like to speak, now's the right time. Put your hand up on Zoom or here. Yes, great. Okay.
I'm sorry I missed a good deal of Laura's presentation, but I was struck by one thing, which was the standard to which we're holding ourselves. And that's, I come to my convictions about the town and about nature from the point of view of restoration, not mitigating against our worst possible outcome. So it strikes me that as a town that works towards its making an honest effort to be an ideal town and doing a great job at it, we should do better than just accepting that the standard was the way things are right now, because we actually know that things are not going well with our current environment. And it would just be wonderful if we could just up the ante just a little bit, so that each time we make a change, we make the world a little better instead of a little worse, or mitigate against worse changes. Thank you. And thank you for your good work.
Good. Thanks. Anyone else here? Anybody else on Zoom? Oh, wait, you already spoke though, didn't you, in this section? Okay. This is, I'm talking specifically about the, this environmental thing. There's specifically this 30-day window. We take comments here, but then that 30-day window is still open. So those comments are what I'm talking about will get addressed in a package. Yeah. It will be a document on the website, I presume.
And if I could ask for even my own edification, where on the website do you submit, or is the information to send the submission to? And then when and where will the responses be available? I kind of like to know both.
So we would like comments to be submitted through the email address, housing@portolavalley.net. That's the best way to send them in. So that's, you can put attachments that way. That's the best thing to do. That email address is the best way to get them into this process. Then there will be a response to comments memo. And then there will be a FAQ on the procedures, like questions about what the steps are. I can't promise that we're going to be able to answer every question that comes in from every resident. That's not a, kind of a typical part of this process, to answer every question. So we're trying to respond to comments and answer process questions.
So through the chair, I think we have to be really careful. We're using comments and questions interchangeably, and they're not. Comments are people expressing concerns, opinions on something that's written. And we hope that, staff's going to look at those comments and then hopefully alter the document to take those into account. Questions are more these open-ended, like, well, how's this going to happen? Why are you doing this? That's not part of a process for getting a document done. So that's why I was trying to separate. I think there's some of these questions that are process questions that we ought to do as an FAQ, because all of us, the Planning Commission and the public, want to just understand how this process is going to unfold. And so those feel to me like things we should put on our website. It's independent of the ISM&D, but it's about the process of delivering it. And so those I just think go on the website, and Laura can decide a place to put them. But I think we need to make sure that that's clearly separated from the comments that we're making on the ISM&D. So that's when I hear this, it just seems like we keep flipping back and forth. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect that Laura is going to answer every question that everybody has about an ISM&D like that. I don't think that can happen. Like, I don't think that's practical, just from a staffing point of view. So at least that's my opinion. So I would ask for the public to make sure that you kind of separate your concerns into the questions that are about process. And I listed as many, I've got half a dozen here that I heard that I want to make sure before we close up that we read out loud so that Laura can say, great, I will make sure I post an answer for those. But the rest, I think, should be comments that go against the ISM&D. And Laura will come up with a document. This is your response to comments, but it's not going to be an answer to each individual question. It's going to be a general document that basically is, here are the changes that we made based on the comments that we've gotten. At least that's my understanding of how we're approaching it.
Yeah, if I
Go
can
ahead.
make one.
Yeah.
comment. I think part of the point is people would like to know what those comments are from each other to each other, rather than them going in and having a work product that may address some but not all. If I understand correctly, they're not allowed to talk within the meeting to each other, and they're given 3 minutes, and they kind of want to know what their neighbors are saying or the comments that are being made. And is that not part of the process? Let's be honest with, is that possible or not?
It's not normally part of the process.
Well, I think we could post the comments. I just don't want to get
Yeah.
staff in the position of having to feel like
I understand.
they have to answer each
I
individual
understand,
comment.
but
That's-
but
yeah,
one is easy, post
right.
stuff
Post,
somewhere.
yeah.
One is hard and may not be completely
Right.
achievable. So,
We can post the comments as they're coming in if the Planning Commission would like us to do that. So far, they have been made public. What we've received has
have.
been made public already. They've been attached to packets, but people would have to, comb through packets.
exactly. I'd
So
kind
yeah,
of like,
we could batch
place
the
to see
public
them.
comments,
Yeah.
and especially, it's not going to be perfect because they're going to be coming in fluid and then they come in more often.
Yeah.
Towards the end, but yeah, we could do that, sure.
I like that. Yeah. If it's a relatively easy thing to do, I think it could be helpful if, I don't want to create a conversation, but that's what I'm hearing.
I like that, yeah. Good, so how about if we answer the questions, as good as, or the process questions that you can answer?
Sure.
So, Ann, could I just make a suggestion on the FAQ? Because could we just list what the questions are and not answer them tonight, but actually have them posted on the FAQ? Because that's my concern is if you're not at this meeting or you don't read through all this stuff, then you don't get this. Whereas I think if we just said, we've all agreed, here are the questions that we heard, And they will be answered on the FAQ rather than actually doing the answers. Would that be okay?
Couldn't we do both? I mean, if people do like to hear right now, to the extent that they're straightforward to answer, instead of now, and then separately, if it fits in the FAQ, I like that.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I mean, it's only 9:36.
Exactly. I am feeling like we got plenty of time here. We got plenty of time.
Okay, so here's some of the big process questions that I heard, and then we can make sure that we've got them all collected at the end so that we can get an FAQ document together. So we were talking about how does a general plan get amended? Who has the authority to do that? It's not me. Number one. Okay, so general plan amendments are subject to a state law process. The state law process says that the planning commission has to review it and make a recommendation to the town council, and the town council has to adopt it. So that is a legal process. The minimum that's required by state law is one public meeting before the planning commission and one public meeting before the council. Some cities do that. I'd be very surprised if this town ever did that. I would expect there would be multiple meetings, typically by both bodies, in order to do that. And there's kind of a question about like a big picture. I take it as kind of a philosophical question about amending the general plan in general. This is a decision that's made by the local jurisdiction. The state requires us to update certain elements of our general plan under certain timelines. And there's also some laws that say that you have to generally check in on your general plan elements and periodically update them is kind of the way that the law works. Most cities undertake a comprehensive update to their general plan periodically. That has not been the way that this town has done it. There was a big update to the general plan. I'm pretty sure it was in 1998, where a majority of the elements were updated. But it's very unusual for there to be a general plan that has not undergone a comprehensive update for the length of time that this town has not. And I take that as an active decision, a philosophical decision. But it is still typical and standard for most cities to periodically take up different issues, revise the general plan, and keep it up to date with the community's expectations at the time. So there are lots of communities that update their general plan regularly. So I just want people to be aware that that's normal. So what is done here is pretty atypical. Not to say it's bad, but it is atypical. So there's even a law that says you can only update certain elements 4 times a year. I mean, that tells you that some cities update their general plan 4 times a year. I mean, so, you know, there's places that schedule general plan updates quarterly because they do them 4 times a year. So there's a full range of things that might be done. So I just want people to have that kind of background, general knowledge. Okay, so there was questions about reviewing peer documents, and this came from Betsy, and that there were tables with the mitigation measures. I would guess that she's talking about what's called the Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program, MMRP. We will have one of those also. We're just not to that stage yet to have produced that document.
In this.
Yes, there will be an MMRP that goes along with this ISMND. And so what you do is you take out all of the things that have mitigation measures and you put all of them into a table and you assign a responsibility for whose responsibility it is to monitor those things. So that product will be forthcoming. That's normal part of an MND. There's a question about whether HCD mandates a program level CEQA analysis. And it's not exactly HCD, it's actually CEQA law that says that you have to do CEQA review on general plan amendments. So the state law says you have to do a CEQA review on general plan amendments, but then depending on the nature of the general plan amendments you're making, the level of CEQA review could vary greatly. It could be a little tiny review, or it could be a gigantic EIR that costs $1 million. Would be a typical EIR that goes with a very big general plan amendment. So anything in there, but you have to do something in order to amend your general plan. You have to make some CEQA statement. to adopt a general plan amendment. So this proposal, this MND has a relationship and a proportionality to the scope of the general plan changes. If there were a lot more general plan changes, it would have to be a more robust document. So it's kind of in the middle is a good way to think about it. And then there's a question about what's an HCD deadline for the CEQA study? Well, it's an indirect deadline because we can't adopt a general plan amendment without a CEQA analysis. Therefore, we have to finish the CEQA analysis if the town's intent is to adopt the housing element by January 31st. And then there's a question about, could we do a program study and then require mandatory CEQA studies down the road? The state law already does this, but maybe not in the exact way that she was asking, but every project still is required to undergo its own individual analysis, but the level of review might vary. So I think her question was, could the town require a higher level of review? And under CEQA law, not really, because every applicant, they may fall into different categories. Like Cara was talking about, there's certain things that are exempt under state law and certain rules. And so the applicant has a reasonable expectation that the CEQA law is going to follow the best practice in the case law when they make an application. The town can require additional analysis through other measures. We just have to make sure that that's compliant with other parts of state law, right? So that's where like our own local findings and our own decision-making process come into play.
Yeah, so if you could just add to it, I mean, what I heard was in addition that there was a concern that somehow the program CEQA would obviate the need for a project CEQA. And I think you just need to answer that directly, which is what you've told us in this meeting is it does not.
It does not. Every project that comes up after the program analysis still has to be analyzed on its own. This gets pretty nuanced, but when Commissioner Targ was asking the question, so once you've adopted a general plan and then you have a project that comes in, it being consistent with the general plan is one of the main findings that you have to make, right? To be able to approve a project, as the Planning Commission well knows, right? So by adopting these amendments to the general plan, we've created those policies that sometimes make it easier to achieve a CEQA exemption because it's consistent with the general plan. It doesn't require a general plan amendment to approve that project. So that's where there might be specialty exemptions. And Commissioner Targ was talking about an infill exemption or an affordable housing exemption, that it may be one step easier to use an exemption on that project. But there would always still have to be an analysis of every individual project that came forward. They could be exempt, they could require an EIR or anything in between. Is that helpful?
Sure, I just think you want to be explicit that there will be this explicit analysis. Because I think from the lay point of view, there's this concern that somehow the program thing then supersedes anything else. And you're saying it doesn't, that there's still going to be an analysis on each individual project. So all I'm saying is just make sure that that wording clearly gets in there. Because I think part of what we're trying to do here is put some of these concerns to bed so they don't keep coming up over and over and over again. It's like, look, this question's been answered. And I understand what you're saying is it's nuanced and I'm okay with that, but that each project will get a review. None of them get a pass.
I have a question. If that's okay. A review of whether there is a review is what I thought I heard earlier. Like for some projects, you can't have any additional burden, right? That's just, so I don't want people to misunderstand. Some projects,
They won't get,
nothing more.
yeah, they might not
ever.
have to do CEQA or a mitigated negative declaration, but there will be analysis that says whether they have to do it or not.
Yeah, yeah. I
There
just
will
wanna
be
clear
nothing
what
that just gets a pass that says, because the program thing was passed, this is just passed for free. There's no.
covered this like 4 times tonight.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I'm trying to get after, my goal of this FAQ is to make these things so clear that we don't keep getting these questions over again, which is why I'm hammering this into the ground. And then another,
We'll still get the question again.
let's try to not get it again. You may be right. I'm trying to be less cynical.
Well,
yeah, we were.
That's what I have for process questions. If others have written some down, I'd be happy to make sure we've got those in the record.
I had one more. Bob asked, when is the zoning? We have 3 more meetings.
Oh, good, thank you. Okay, there will be, parts of the zoning will be back on November 30th for that meeting. And we'll be talking about, the amendments to the other elements of the general plan on November 30th, 2 weeks from tonight. So that's a really important meeting. That's the first time we'll talk about, the other amendments to the general plan. And then we're just continuing to work on what you've requested for the zoning. So we'll bring a piece back on the 30th, and then we'll continue to work on that. I'm going to be working with the chair to come up with like an organizing principle of how we're going to organize the next 3 meetings. So we're working on that. We've talked about that so that you've got, really the 30th and the 7th of December to really discuss these issues so that stuff is in pretty good shape for you to make a recommendation on the 13th.
So I've got some. On the general plan, I would say there's 2 things. This goes for the ISMND as well as, what's the deadline? And I think the answer to that is January 31st.
Yes.
Right, that's when we're getting, but I think we should just state that, and you've stated it multiple times, I'd just like to get it in the FAQ, that our goal is to get the housing element, the modification to the general plan, the mitigated negative declaration, all those things need to get done sort of at the same time. And then maybe explain why the safety element in this draft form can then come in later, so that people can see that in the FAQ.
Okay.
And then there were 2 questions. One was on this fault trace, why the map got changed. I think it needs to get answered. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. And at some level, I almost don't care, other than I think the public deserves an answer on how it got changed.
Okay.
And it may have been administrative. I mean, whatever it is, but let's write it down so we don't have to keep getting it.
Have that.
Hmm?
That was covered in a meeting with the town geologist 9 months ago, right?
Well, then let's.
Anyway,
put-
we'll dig it out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we've covered it, but we'll dig it out.
Right, so let's put it as, I'm just saying, for the FAQ, let's just make sure that it's there so we don't have this. And then the same thing with, the change in the wildfire map. I mean, why do we get a CAL FIRE? And what are the implications of that? Because, that's clearly, I mean, what wildfire risk is clearly a big issue for everybody here. And so that one's kind of a hot button issue.
Okay, do we want to speak to, I think it was Bob's questions about what recourse to the residents have? So we being the staff consultant team, will issue the response to comments memo. And then if residents don't think that that's sufficient, then they need to bring those comments to the planning commission and or the town council meetings. So that's the recourse for the residents. And I think along with that was a question about an EIR process. So what would happen if there were significant impacts in our analysis? An EIR process has more steps than a mitigated negative declaration does. And so it would be a matter of going through those additional steps, months that were associated with that additional work. So it would delay adoption of the housing element.
Right, which gets to I think basically my last point is, we've talked about it here, but putting something up on the builder's remedy so that people, because I think some of the public's starting to feel like this is being used as a threat to force this through on the 31st, which I don't think is at all the intent of staff. I don't think staff's just trying to do the job, and I'm totally on board with that. I think people need to understand that by not getting it done, what risk the town's at. And I think that should be up as an FAQ, just something that says, there's this thing called builder's remedy, and here's what happens if we're not substantially in compliance. And I know you said it many, many, many times. I'd like to get in the FAQ so it's one place and I can point people there and say, look, here's the answer to this question, and we don't keep the answer. Does that seem reasonable? And
Yeah,
then-
it's just hard to write some of those answers on something that's so uncertain, but we just need to capture that in an answer. I understand your point.
Right, and I think it's okay to say, look, we don't know for sure, and I think we don't. I mean,
Yeah,
we don't know if there's any builders who would want to take advantage of it. We don't know what substantially in compliance means. I think it's okay to say, but how much risk do we want to take? Because that's the question that ultimately gets asked of the planning commission and the council to actually make that judgment call. The public at least needs to know that there is a judgment call that needs to be made, that it's not just an idle threat. There is some risk, and then we just have to decide how much of that we want to take on.
Right, it's a risk analysis
Yes.
for starting with the planning commission and your recommendations, and then ultimately with the council.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think that would be helpful.
If I could just add one request, the fault map, I think there was both the substance, but there was also the process. What is the normal process for amending the fault map? And, you know, what happened here? So that's for the question. And then I did hear a request for clarification and on where Madhurst Applewood is in the zones. So I don't know if that's something for the commentary memo. But there was a lack of express reference. This was Mrs. Russell's comment.
Okay.
That some of the zones didn't quite match up.
Yeah,
For
it
instance,
wasn't clear.
My own particular area is lumped in with the ranch in one particular sector, which doesn't bother me, but it doesn't quite line. I don't think all
Yeah,
the sections
exactly.
don't.
Where is it supposed to be?
Yeah.
Got everybody's process questions? Yeah, you got them all? Okay.
I mean, I'm hoping this will help improve things, because I'm trying to take load off of you. I mean, I know this probably sounds like more load right now, but my long-term goal is to take load off of you. So hopefully we'll achieve it.
Good, okay, item number 2.
There you go. Commissioner.
Commission reports. Any commissioners with a report?
If I could, through the chair, say thank you to our consultant team that came
Oh,
to the
yeah.
meeting tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I finished with one item and then I
know.
jump.
Yeah.
What am I gonna do next? I'm supposed to say goodbye, thank you.
Good, okay, I think I'm hearing no commissioner reports.
Got anything else you're working on?
No.
I would like to report that our new development review technician, Thomas, is really doing a wonderful job. And it's amazing to have another staff person. So that's really great. And I think you all know this, but our senior planner, Adrienne, is back from maternity leave. She's here tonight in the background listening, and she'll be writing that FAQ. So we can all be excited about that. So it's tremendous to have another full-time person and my full-time person back. So it makes a really big difference for my team.
Where do you think you're gonna post them? Like if the public were going to go look for it in say a week, do you have an idea where it would be?
It'll be on the housing element page on a tab called public comments.
Okay, great.
I mean, we had a housing element meeting. I think the commissioners were all there, so I don't know if we need a report, but we got Laura's report on the letter from HCD. Good.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to take any questions, but I think you're all very much up to speed on that. So that's all I have for you from the staff report.
Okay. We'll go on to the minutes where we have.
I'm sorry, through the chair, we have a hand up. That we
Oh,
should
that's
take.
right, that's right, on staff report. Yes, Rita?
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. Just the question, with all of these projects that we have going on at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, it would be really nice to see what's the update, you know, such as the Stanford Wedge DEIR that so many of these other documents seem to be referring to in some way. It'd be really nice to see like all of these consultants are working on that particular project, but that was done, what was it, May 13th. And we haven't had a public comment on what's the status of that particular document. And we're anxiously awaiting that particular document because the housing element touches on some things. The Stanford Wedge is included in the housing element as housing units and affordable housing units. So it's just not very clear. And a lot of our questions could be answered by, the effort that we've put forth in answering and making comments and questions on that particular document. It would make life a lot easier for us. And it just seems to be something that's pending, and we're just doing new projects and not finishing up these other pending ones. But like I said before, fixing holes in the past projects, but they're not being closed. They're not being finished. They're not being done, but we seem to be starting new projects to fix the holes in those past projects that are not finished. Please, I know this particular commission is going to be changing in the next couple of weeks. Please finish some of those projects. The residents really want those things finished. And it just seems like there's a rush to the gate, but these things need to be finished and they need to be documented so that we have then a history of what we need to do moving forward. And 5 years from now, 8 years from now, when we're looking at these same issues again, we have something to look back on what happened at this time. Thank you.
Let's see, next, Carol Russell, and we're taking comments on the staff reports right now. Uh-oh. Go ahead, Carol. Your hand was up, then it flashed away. Now it's back up.
Sorry, that's, I don't have any questions of the staff. Thank you.
Thanks. Christy, we're taking comments on the staff reports. Go ahead.
I'm gonna pass as well.
Okay. Can you come up to the mic if you don't mind?
That way it gets recorded.
As part of the Q&A that Commissioner Taylor is requesting, could the slides that were presented tonight be publicly available on the website so all residents can see the material?
Let's see, we'll move on to the minutes. We have,
Can I speak to Rita's comment?
of course, yes.
I answered this question the last time Rita asked it,
Yeah.
which is the response to comments is still underway. It's been a tremendous amount of work. We received hundreds of pages of comments. We had to extend the contract. Our sub-consultants had availability issues. And I indicated that we would be updating the website, and our project planner has requested those changes. They might be live by now. If not, they will be soon. But it's just not done yet. It's been that much work.
Thanks, Laura. We'll move on to item number 4, which is minutes from our last meeting, which we have long meeting minutes now. Thank you, Laura. Does anybody have comments on these meetings, these minutes?
I think they're great. I really appreciate it. I know how much work it is. But I do have my usual set of clarifications. I think they're all pretty straightforward. Page 37, just above midway, the unlined zoning, I think it means underlying zoning. Minor. Red page 41. At the very last, it says, I commented, etc. And that would constrain public comment, public input. I also said because it would result in one fewer meeting or fewer meetings. So you can check if my recollection is accurate, but that was an important point. Hopefully it's on there.
That's from the comments from the side that you can think of.
44, red page 44, midway down, I Commissioner Haskell noticed that the concept for afflicted partners should be affiliated partners.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Spell
Yes.
correct gets us again.
Red page 47, Dorothy Ford Park, right in the middle is Dorothy, just a typo, minor thing. Red page 48, the long paragraph starting Betsy Morgenthaler, 4 lines up from the bottom. I think it's minimum lot width, and LOT instead of lock width. And then the next paragraph, Ellen Vernat said the second line, I think her point was eliminating parking on Applewood Road. It says eliminating parking would continue to block the properties. I think she said unless you eliminate or allowing parking, because logically you would only block properties if there were parking in the way. And this is phrased as eliminating parking.
Yeah, I think she said not eliminating.
Yeah. Okay, they were long, so thank you. Red page 51, second paragraph. Commissioner Haskell stated, and the second line, what needs to be done by January 31, 2023, not 2022? And then the very first paragraph on that page, I think there's a period where there needs to be a whole sentence concept. If the town, Commissioner Targ said the issues regarding setbacks are a priority, and while he was concerned about building separation wildfires, period, I think that's supposed to be a comma. The fire marshal will provide their comments. So I think that was just a typo. Red page 51, last big paragraph. I don't know, about 8 lines up from the bottom. There's a sentence saying with has to be done. I think it should probably say this has to be done or something. Red page 52. I'm losing the audience. Sorry, guys. Commissioner Targ, it's about 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph. It says toward the end, requested a crosswalk to be developed that identified the line in the housing element that generated the modification. So I don't know what crosswalk is supposed to be there.
That's a target term.
Oh, okay.
Sort of bringing together two
Oh,
ideas.
okay. If it's a
Then-
targism, we
yeah,
can leave that.
It is.
All right. Sorry, Nicholas. I now respect that term. All right. That's it. Okay, good.
And guardrails. We all say guardrails now. because of
Crosswalk and
Commissioner Targ.
guardrails. Okay. I'm on board.
Anybody else have comments on the minutes from the commissioner? I have one on red page 47 at the top. The first paragraph, it talks about me and then it about the opt-in program and how many parcels. Then it just has a hanging thing, Carla Violet, Urban Planning Partner. I think she answered there were 150. I see the rest of that sentence.
Yeah, I think we said approximately 150.
That part's missing. That's it.
You ready for motion?
No, we have to take public comments.
Okay. I wasn't sure where we do that. Do we do it before the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, Great.
So we'll take public comments on, just on these minutes, if you don't mind. So let's see, Christy Corley.
This is actually Betsy Morgenthaler.
That's
So
fine.
taking the wrong spot.
Nope.
I just wanted to say that there must be a very long German word for the sweetness of having something lost and then suddenly returned to you. So I just want to say thank you so much, staff, for making this happen. It's totally wonderful. And one of my favorite parts of the Planning Commission meeting is listening to Judith go through a very long list of corrections because attention is love. So thank you all. I think it's a wonderful moment.
Okay, great.
You can look forward to it, the council.
Great. Caroline, I think that's your number up there.
My hand was raised on other issues, and so this is not about the minutes, it's about the conduct. I don't think it's appropriate that people are laughing when we, the residents, have been impacted by the lack of process and the lack of abiding by our general plan. We are all impacted, and to continuously propose wonderful propositions. But again, like I said today, the CEQA rules have not been applied, and not to list the CEQA rules and then ignore the cumulative impact of all the projects in the last 5 years that have been approved by staff, all just approving it and saying that they were not, that they all were CEQA exempt. And we all have submitted the data to show that the decision-making by staff was incorrect. This is appalling and it's not acceptable. Thank you.
Christy Corley, we're taking comments on the minutes.
Yes, read page 49, second sentence. For the opt-in program, she inquired what process a parcel would have to go through to be included in the program. I think I said that many residents are not in favor of the opt-in program, and because it can cause problems within neighborhoods and between neighbors possibly. And I encouraged you to research the town of San Clemente and what happened there. Thank you.
Can I go back to the last comment from Caroline? You know, when people criticize the commission, I feel like, yeah, I'm going to take it, but it's kind of hard to listen to you criticize the staff. I'm positive they have not slid projects through that shouldn't have been slid through. If there were ones that were required to have administrative review, I'm sure they did that, but I really can't listen to the staff is doing something wrong or not right. So I didn't like that. Now we could have a motion on the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of November 2nd
With the changes that
with the changes as stated.
we all made. Yeah.
A second.
Commissioner Taylor,
Aye.
Commissioner Targ,
We couldn't hear you, but I could see him. Yeah, I could see him.
I'm sorry, can we have the crosswalk, please?
we kept the crosswalk. Are you in favor of the minutes?
Yes, indeed.
Commissioner Haskell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Golden,
Aye.
Chair Kopsel.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. And how about a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everyone. Stay until the bitter end, even the minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We're recording it.
Thank you. Got to get through it. Thank you.